You are now listening to Sanity at the Movies, Capricorn edition. Yay! Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas to you, Ben.
Thanks, Nathan.
You wonderful old podcaster.
Merry Christmas, Jake.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Mr. Potter.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Potter.
Merry Christmas to you. In Sanityville. In jail. In jail. Sentimental Hogwarts. Sentimental Hogwarts. Peter Bailey was the building. Peter Bailey was no businessman. Now, I don't mean any disrespect. He was a man of high principle, so-called. So-called, yeah. That's awesome. The whole cadence of that is just brilliant.
This is the first time that I noticed that Mr. Potter keeps a large picture of himself hanging in his office looking down.
And a skull on his desk.
On the desk. I noticed the skull before, but not the picture.
The picture is amazing.
Yeah.
Not a nice gentleman, Mr. Potter.
No, not so much.
Why do you think that the forces, that big bureaucracy in the sky, as it's always portrayed in these kinds of movies, why didn't they decide to redeem Mr. Potter? They could have sent a couple ghosts, an angel, something.
Ebenezer Scrooged him.
Would have done a lot more good for Bedford Falls than saving old George Bailey.
Because Mr. Potter's not an everyman, and we're telling the story of every man here.
Mr. Potter's not an everyman. It's true. Well, guys.
Sorry to give the serious answer to your fun question.
That is the question that I always ask, and I think it makes sense. If you believe in Reaganomics, the trickle-down theory of economics, then it makes perfect sense that we redeem Ebenezer Scrooge. By redeeming Ebenezer Scrooge, we redeem half of London. He's one of the most influential businessmen in that merry old town. I guess you could say the same thing for George Bailey. Plus, a bunch of people prayed for him at the beginning of the movie, so
yeah,
I guess that's
nobody's
why.
praying for Mr. Potter.
Nobody's praying for Mr. Potter. Well, guys, we actually talked about this movie in a Sanity at the Movies Mach 1 episode that I guess is still out there under the Sound of Sanity banner that people can find.
It was an epic episode.
It was an epic-sode.
Episode.
But today, I consider this to be more of like a celebration. This is going to be a nice, easy listening podcast. We're going to take our time. We're going to go through the movie. We're going to talk about what we love.
Yeah.
Maybe make fun of some of the things that are silly, if there are any things.
There's nothing silly to make fun of in this movie.
That was silly of you to say, Nathan.
Right.
I'm going to laugh at that.
Make fun of me.
I'm going to make fun of you.
No, I would never go against this movie. To do that would be like to be Mr. Walsh, and I'd have the whole bar turn against me, kick me out, say I could.
Mr. Welsh.
Mr. Welsh. Yes.
Yeah.
Never.
It's not allowed in your bar.
Walsh. I was trying to remember.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, man.
He's no coming in here anymore.
He's no coming in here.
He no coming here no more. You got that, Nick? Yeah, sure.
Sure. Oh, man.
I think it would be fun to play some of those like Martini or Nick type characters like in a stage production of this, where you go from Nick's just like the buddy to now I talk like a wise guy.
Yeah. I need to slip you my lip for a convincer.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't need characters in here for atmosphere.
Mr. Gower, he's 1 minute he's the drunk who's trying to poison a kid. He's redeemed by George, and so now he's this awesome guy.
He's like standing on a car selling war bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's he gets the awesome travel bag that never gets used for George, and then in this other world he's the drunk who gets sprayed in the face. And
right.
Yeah, there's nobody that has a nothing part in this. Maybe what's George's brother's name? Harry. Maybe Harry's wife. She's kind of got a nothing part.
But she's used to great effect.
Exactly.
I mean, in that one moment, Harry's got to go get the bags, and so
the world feels lived in.
The world feels. My hot take for that scene, which I suppose we'll get to, but I'll jump the gun a little bit. I think that's Jimmy Stewart's best acting. That train scene, just all the little micro expressions that play over his face. People like to when everybody can do their Jimmy Stewart impression like that with all the little ticks and mannerisms and stuff, but where Jimmy Stewart's really great. I mean, I don't have a problem with the ticks and mannerisms. I think they're really fun and great.
Mm-hmm.
maybe you could argue later in his career he leaned on him a little bit much. But especially in these early days, I think people forget, or these mid kind of career days, people forget he wasn't a bag of tricks. There's actually not that much of the Jimmy Stewart kind of thing in this movie. A dog named Bo.
Here's the other thing that I think is worth noting that I noticed. I watched this, I think, remastered for 4K.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many little details that I didn't ever notice before, like, you know, and we'll get to it. So it's like, you know, that moment when he's like, okay, with the kids at the end, I'm sorry, Janie, go on and play. What was it you wanted to spell? Whatever.
What did you want?
He's got a tear. He's like sobered up, but he still has a tear coming down his cheek.
Yeah.
Like, I'd never noticed that before, but there are little details like that I think are, it's in the micro expression. It's not like that tear was planted. Like I think that's an acting tear.
Yeah, no, he's just he's a good actor.
I think he was really in the like he was really
and I think he's such a good light comedian. He's so good at the banter and the not in Bedford Falls anyway, kind of those sort of throwaways that you sort of don't even notice or forget to notice when he's just reacting to things, when he's just being still, when he's being calm, when a million things are going on under those expressions, and he's really, really good at that kind of stuff. And I think the best place to watch for it is in the train scene where you watch his face lose all hope while everybody around him is happy, and then him slowly put on his composure and then slowly find his joy, find his happiness and his brother's happiness. All this happens and there's no gee whiz mannerisms. There's nothing. It's just his face is basically blank, but you can see it all in his eyes, and
he realizes what he's got to do. And he knows he's going to do it. And you even see that he's angry about it for half a second.
Right.
Yeah.
It's despair and anger, and, you know, all that's going to come out later that night, but he's still going to do the thing. You know, he's going to talk to her, and
I think that's fun. It's like in every scene he recreates for you the whole story of the character.
Yes.
Yeah, and the more you watch it, the more you realize, like, it's one thing that makes this movie work structurally is like every scene recapitulates. Like, this is who this guy is, and this is what he wants. This is what makes him happy, and this is why in the end he's gonna overcome it.
Yeah, that's really true. That's a good insight, Ben. You should be a podcaster about movies, I think.
Man, someday maybe.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart just exists as that character, and he communicates those things. And the screenplay is really stacked. One thing that I was noticing that's nice is it is almost like a play in that every scene is written to recapitulate those things and to stack stuff. It's not just the day that him and Mary had a sexually charged encounter. It's also the day that his dad died, and it's also the day that Mr. Potter came creeping. Like every one of the times the angels are going to check in, it's because everything important happens.
Converged. And it's meant to, I mean, it doesn't feel like a cheat because something's happening right now and you need the Cliff's Notes version of who this guy is. And so we're zeroing in on these little incredibly potent moments that sometimes things really do converge for people. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And that's not all of life, but sometimes they do.
Yeah. This movie, though, it's always converging, and it makes it feel more epic and more like a fairy tale and more, it does a lot of things, I think, for the story they're telling. But it actually makes the weird scenes where things don't converge as much stand out, like the martini delivery scene and stuff like that. There's even some convergence there. But when the movie actually slows down for just the passage of time or for just sort of check in, it's pretty noticeable. Yeah. Because usually it's stacked together in the way that a great play would be or a great novel or something like that.
Yeah. What's one thing that's fun is you feel like it's played fair with the characters in your absence. Like, you weren't there for Mary's 4 years of college. Does Mary still make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's not because she stayed the same, actually. They track these characters' development. I always think of Mary as just the goody two-shoes kind of flower of all womanhood. But they play her anger. They play her youthful impetuosity, if that's the noun form of that word, impetuousness.
She's going to break the record.
She breaks the record.
She's going to, Sam, how? She's going to try to make George jealous. She's going to, George, why must you torture the children? You know, she's going to have those moments.
Yeah, like Donna Reed manages to actually make, without doing much of anything, just in the way that the clothes are designed and the way the scenes are shot and just in her performance.
Yeah.
Mary suddenly becomes matronly around the time that she has kids.
Yeah,
and she's not before. And
then when you see her at the library, in the fantasy world,
it's hard to believe it's her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's totally different.
That's a cheap moment in the movie, which I suppose we'll get to and we'll talk about. But and maybe we'll agree or disagree with that. But she plays it. This is.
I saw a quote. I was looking at Wikipedia a little bit before this, but I saw a random quote from Donna Reed that said, "No director ever asked as much as Frank Capra did for It's a Wonderful Life of her personally as an actress."
Huh.
Like that was that was the hardest thing.
Well, it is hard, and all you have to do is watch any other movie from that era that has this type of role, and you can see how flat it can be. How there's not a lot about Mary on the page that's all that interesting. I think the record-breaking scene is interesting. Other than that, she really is a symbol, a type, a plot point, as much as anything. But Donna Reed brings a lot of little touches of humanity to her that really make the character. I mean, I was thinking about other types like that. Joan Leslie and Sergeant York or Yankee Doodle Dandy. I think Joan Leslie played the idyllic wife in both of those movies. You know, characters like that. And it can be really girlish or really flat or really just idealized in a way that Donna Reed actually figures out. Every place where she could be that, just become a type, she manages to subvert it just enough that she still is the type, she still is the symbol, but she also functions as like a real character that would actually be married to George Bailey, that actually likes George Bailey and loves her kids. And the other thing that I really appreciated in this viewing, and we'll get to our overarching thoughts, folks, in a second, and then we'll go through the movie chronologically, but the way that the characters age up is so subtle, and it's not really done with makeup or anything like that. It is really just the convergence of the movie gods blessing this movie. Jimmy Stewart was at just the right age where he can put on a preppy sweater and he can play 20, and then he can grow out some grizzled hair and he can wear a suit and he can play 30, and then he can have grizzled facial hair and he can play 40.
Yeah.
And they don't do anything. I mean, I don't think if they do anything, it's really, really subtle.
Yeah, it's not much.
Yeah.
Donna Reed, same thing. I think Jimmy Stewart was 38 when this movie was filmed. Maybe 37 when it was filmed, 38 when it came out. Donna Reed was 26, 25, something like that. Same thing for her. She can play girl who hasn't gone to college, and then she can play wife and mother of, what is it, 4 or 5?
4. And
the movie doesn't do anything special in terms of, except for that stupid library scene, it doesn't do anything special in terms of aging her up or down. It's just, it's wardrobe as much as anything. And acting, you know, I mean, Jimmy Stewart somehow makes himself feel thinner and feel more gangly when he's a kid. And some of it, he's wearing an oversized kind of preppy sweater for a lot of those scenes. It's that dumb sweater that he wears after they fall in the swimming pool.
It's actually it's not oversized. It's undersized.
It's undersized. Yeah. You're right.
His pants are oversized. He has to hold them up while he's got the shirt that's like clinging to him and really accentuating his gangly sort of frame. Right,
which really makes him look like a young man. He does not look all of 38 in those early scenes.
And then you just put him in an overcoat, a suit, nice thick tweed jacket, fill out his frame and accentuate his shoulders and then give him some grizzled hair, and he's a plausible late 30s or 40 by the time the movie ends. I just always think that makeup's overdone in modern movies. Like you have to let people act to achieve those kinds of age differences. Actually, now we do it digitally as much as anything. They'll digitally de-age or digitally age up, and you can do some subtle, interesting stuff with that. Generally speaking, if you notice it, it's because it wasn't well done, but digital cosmetics are done all the time and you don't notice it. That being said, they didn't have access to any stuff like that at this time, and it's really impressive. You don't even think about it. Until I've seen this movie, a dozen times, dozens of times, I never really thought about it. And something that's similar for me is Citizen Kane, where the makeup's pretty subtle that Orson Welles uses, but he ages from a young man in his 20s all the way to a decrepit old man in his 60s or 70s, and it's just a hair piece and
I mean, it's really a hairpiece, a mustache, and the way that he carries himself.
Yeah.
It's magical.
It is magical.
Well, what's you guys' take on this movie, generally speaking, and what did you think about it coming back to it this time?
The 30th time.
The 30th time,
or the 40th.
At least, yeah.
I don't know how many times, but I grew up watching it every Christmas with my family, and I haven't done that since I left the nest, but I've seen it a lot since then anyway, and I still love it. And every time it comes around to watch it, and you asked me to watch it for this podcast, Nathan, and I was like, I just saw that last year, maybe, or 2 years ago. I just saw that. I don't need to see that again, but I knew I would still enjoy it. I did. So I love it. It's one of my top 3 movies. Maybe it's just my favorite movie. It's my favorite Christmas movie. It makes, I know the places it will make me cry, and it still does. And I still try not to show anyone that I'm crying because I'm not good at crying in front of people about movies. I feel silly. It's great.
I did not expect to cry this time. I sat down. I was going to take notes. I was actually only going to watch a little bit of it just because I need to get through this for the podcast, but I don't actually want to commit the time or the emotional energy to watching this.
Sure.
Cut to 2 hours later, my wife has wandered in from whatever she was doing, and we're both holding hands and in tears, and she's mad at me for demanding that much emotional catharsis in the middle of the day.
We had the exact same experience. So I had a notebook and a pen. I didn't take a single note. I turned it on in the middle of the day, middle of the morning, because Amanda had a dentist appointment, and I had to be home watching little boys. So I thought, I'll just get this done. If I'm going to be basically babysitting, I might as well get some work done. The kind of work you can do while I'm watching a 4 and 5 year old, just watch a movie. So I flipped it on, and then Amanda got home and ended up on the couch with me. And yeah, I haven't actually cried as much. Well, I cry every time I watch this movie. I don't know the places where I'm going to cry because it hits me in different places at different times, and sometimes it's unexpected, and this time was the most unexpected of all of them. And I basically just cried my way through the whole movie. This was just yesterday, and I've pretty actively avoided thinking about all the reasons it hit me so hard this time.
Yeah, we probably can't actually talk about all of them. I'm just going to take a wild guess. I'm not thinking like, oh, well, it's because Jake yelled at his kids. That's not what I'm saying, folks.
No.
I'm saying, but some of those things are probably personal. But
yeah. I mean, everything, if you just consider everything of after 18 years moving back home and leaving a place I love and people I love and people I love dying and the awfulness of 2020, and those are some starting points, at least for me personally.
Well, is probably worth saying, without saying anything else, we did all just have a mutual friend die who was George Bailey, who was
that kind of centerpiece of
a beloved man
of a community that would never think of himself as the centerpiece of a community.
And I wasn't actively actually making that connection during the movie, but I think
I didn't make it until just now.
Yeah.
That was something. And then the other thing that was connecting for me, this is the first time I've actually watched the movie since I've been married. I've been married for about 2 years now. And I think, but I'm not good at math, folks. That's why I'm a podcaster. I mean, it was the same stuff that always makes me cry, but all that sort of impotent rage that George feels and the way that he takes it out on his poor, long-suffering wife and kids, that was
more real,
powerful in a new way.
Yeah. And it's not going to stop being powerful in new ways for you. You've got a kid coming, and guess what, man? You're still going to go George Bailey on your kids at points.
Well, the scene that really hurt, because I've done this so many times to my wife in our short marriage, is he apologizes to the family and then he gets angry again because they won't just accept that his apology, the issue is closed. I was like, okay, start playing the piano. Everything's fine. I just said, I'm sorry. Everything's good. It's fine. And like, we can see that everything's not fine.
It's not fine.
Your world is falling to pieces, dude. Like, what are you trying to pull?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times that's happened. And I think we have a good marriage, folks. So I'm not trying to paint. I don't know how many times I put my wife through that.
That's part of the genius of how they write Mary too, is like Mary takes it. she has a line. She expects a little bit of that from George. She knows he's had a hard day. She's going to try to get him into the kitchen. She's going to try to divert him. Eventually, she's going to say, why are you torture the children?
Yeah.
He's going to leave. And then she's going to be like, I got to figure out what's going on here. We got to get to work.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, it is pretty awesome. Like, she doesn't undermine him, but she stands up to him. That's pretty sweet. I was thinking from also, we've been married 2.5 years, I think. Again, I'm also not good at math.
Not me and Ben, but Ben and his wife.
No, not Nathan and Ben, but Ben and Megan. And so I don't know. I think we cried at a lot of the same places, but I was just thinking, like, I always used to watch
Am I
this.
insane? Are you guys? I feel like you guys have been married 1.5 years. Am I crazy?
You are. Wait, no, hold on. Whoops. No, yeah, you're right.
You're like 2 years, 2.5 years. I'm pretty sure
We
you
added
guys
a year.
are about,
I added a year.
Yeah. You did,
both
and I
added a
followed
year.
you into
Yeah,
your
it just feels like 2.5 years.
And you're only two. I'm only 2 months ahead of you.
Right.
So not half a year. Man, math. You stink.
I said I wasn't good at math.
Well, I can't just accept that, Nathan. What do you stop tormenting us with your bad math? Our wives are going to be like, what in the world?
I just wanted to sound like less of a jerk. We've been through this 1,000,000 times.
1,000,000 times.
In the last 14 months.
In the last 14 months.
Or 15 months, or however.
I can identify with what you were saying, Nathan, about your anger and stuff and being, like, now I'm over it, but no, you're clearly not over it. But I also remember watching this as a kid as, like, George Bailey kind of being in love with Donna Reed, whatever, Mary Hatch. And thinking, oh, and I'm not at that stage anymore. Like, I'm married. I found the woman I love. And now I'm watching this movie differently.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It changed on me. And I was like, oh, yeah, I hope we'll have kids someday. And then I'll be able to identify with that kind of anger and frustration. And like,
Well, so many love scenes don't work for me. I don't mean sex scenes, but scenes where a man is wooing a woman or vice versa don't work for me as well. Now that I'm married, when I go back to them, it's like, oh, that's trite. Or now I know how that works, and that's not it. It all just seems more Hollywoody a lot of times when I see, like, I watch an old romantic comedy, and it's like when I watched that when I was 14, I had some understanding of how trite it was, but now I really understand how little it has to do with any kind of experience of man, woman, sex, anything. This movie's not like that. The scenes of courtship, Mary's desire for him, his desire for her, the ways that they both express those things are really potent, really sweet, and really scary.
Yeah.
All at once.
It is doomed to be an artifact because you can't write as if sex and sexuality matter and work the way God made them to work anymore in Hollywood. That is that is what Capra and the screenwriters and the actors really, really get on a visceral level.
Yeah, they do.
That whole...
The phone scene.
The whole phone scene.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Everything about it. And everything from... And it seems like it's made for Hollywood, but you listen to me. I don't want plastic, and I don't want this.
ground floors.
I don't want ground floors, and I don't want to...
I want what
get married. I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
Dissolving into them both crying and kissing. It's
brutal.
Yeah, we've all been there, right?
It doesn't matter that our love scenes with our wives didn't happen that way. It matters that it caught our emotions and just traps you.
No, it's what it is it's a distillation. I think we've all done that dance with our wives, and we've all done the dance of, oh, well, this is the moment where you're into me, and I don't want you to take that power, actually. Like, you're going to, if you come on too strong, you're going to make me impotent, and it's just going to add to the impotence that I already feel everywhere else in my life.
I came here feeling completely frustrated, angry, and impotent, and here you are.
And you're going to say you chose me?
That
just takes another thing.
Screw this. Like, I'm out of here. I don't want anything. Like, I can't.
But the second I break you down and you start crying, then I'm gonna melt.
Like, wait a minute.
Oh, okay, I guess
that's funny because I did all of that stuff on the front end. Like, I was so irritated when I was told that to email my now wife Megan that I was like, I felt all of that George Bailey stuff with it before I even talked to her. So I don't remember that we had that drama in our brief courtship, but we had it. We just didn't have it, you know.
I think most of that drama for us has happened in the space of our marriage. I mean, our courtship was very much Nathan is the single-minded pursuer who has forgotten everything else in his life besides this one goal. And she's like, who again? Nathan who? So, but certainly that scene, I mean, I don't really want to talk about it, right? But that scene resonates, you know. I mean,
it's potent.
We've all had that.
Yeah, you're right. It keeps going.
What they understand, without being all, I don't know how to talk about this in a way that doesn't sound, I'm talking about some kind of liberal buzzword, you know, toxic masculinity or power in relationships. But this story does understand impotence and potence and power and things like that as they relate to human sexuality in a way that's sweet. I mean, like I just said, I don't know how to talk about it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm saying something that that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. But it does it just understands how much those things are connected. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it turns around, you know, so the next scene is they get married, but then there's the run on the bank. What you love about Mary is that she understands how George works, and she knows what she loves about George. Mm-hmm. And so to Mary to give up their honeymoon, what you don't feel from Mary is that Mary's making a sacrifice. What you feel like is Mary's like, yeah, like this is why I married you. This is what I love about you. You go save the day. I'm going to go figure out a way to make it sweet when you get home.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it just occurred to me that Mary is actually the simple-hearted believer in Bedford Falls. George is not. George is like right.
George has never believed.
But Mary wanted to come back. Mary wanted George. Mary wanted what George means and what Bedford Falls means all wrapped together. And that was Mary's getting it.
So Mary's the maker of Bedford Falls and the maker of George in that sense.
Yeah.
But in a very feminine sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Anyone in a good marriage understands that your wife gets you and knows who you should be a lot better than you do on a daily basis, at the very least, maybe on a larger, more fundamental basis. A man, a godly man, a man who leads his marriage still needs his wife to tell him who he is. That's part of the function of a helpmate, is to say, hey, remember who you are. To be trampled by wildebeests and then appear in the clouds.
With the voice of a large black man.
Yeah, exactly. Which my wife does all the time, by the way.
I meant to tell you how sorry I was about that wildebeest.
The wildebeest stampede. You know, I tried to save her, but
well, it's in the past.
My dastardly uncle told me it was my fault, and it is in the past. Now I eat bugs.
The past still hurts.
Yeah, the past. Well, you can either learn from it or you can run from it. I'm going to take your stick, Ben.
And beat me with it.
Oh, brother. So I guess we like this movie.
Sounds like it. Sounds like we're going to talk about it in an orderly way and couldn't help ourselves from... Well,
we'll try and give some order to this conversation. I don't know. Are there any other big picture thoughts that you guys want to give before we go through this bad boy?
I have one big picture thought, which actually Megan suggested it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Which is that there's no fathers in the movie after George's dad dies.
Right.
He's the only father. He's the only father in town. Mm-hmm. He doesn't even have someone who's like a peer to him the whole movie. Like there's no one in his life. You know, Harry kind of pops in and out, and you could see his brother standing up to him and being helpful to him, but Harry's not there.
Uncle Billy's a moron.
Uncle Billy's a moron. Like George is always saving Uncle Billy. Uncle Billy barely hangs on to sanity. George doesn't have anyone to look to. Peer, father, no one. Like he's the only dude, and the movie is stacked against him, and all the pressures of Bedford Falls are weighing him down. He has no one else to look to.
Yeah,
and I'd never thought about how the movie stacked it that way before.
Yeah, it's interesting,
and he always then feels the pressure to take the bullet for everybody else.
Yeah,
and when it comes down to he's going to take the bullet for Uncle Billy and leave his wife and kids destitute. Man. And that's the decision that he feels like he has to make.
It's a horrible bullet.
It's a bullet that he knows is the wrong bullet to take. So instead, he's going to jump off a bridge.
Right.
Yeah.
At least I'll get Uncle Billy out of prison. I'll save the building and loan, and I'll have some money left over for the kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Mary. That's where his logic drives him to.
Well, it makes you want to be a Presbyterian, right? Because the idea is that you have a bunch of fathers and they all help sharing the load. I mean, that's a silly way to say it, folks. I know, but...
Well, I don't think Frank Capra... I think that is a good point about the movie. I also think it points to what's weak about Frank Capra, and the movie I think works in many ways in spite of Capra, because I think Capra, and I think we probably talked about this on our episode, I think Capra does think that George Bailey is a hero. He thinks that George Bailey is justified in his anger, and he thinks that everyone who doesn't like George Bailey is an idiot. He intentionally plays Mr. Potter as the worst kind of villain.
Yeah.
Mr. Walsh, the movie has no sympathy for him once he turns on George Walsh, whatever his name is. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the town is gauged as good or bad, depending on how much they like George Bailey. We don't have a lot of sympathy for the bank guy who's just doing his job at the end. We don't have a lot of sympathy for anybody who is a very George Bailey-centric universe. And I think that it stacks things against George in a way that... So let me go out on a limb and sound like I'm saying something negative about the movie. I don't think I actually am. I think Capra, in the way that he thought, wanted to stack things against George Bailey. I don't think that Capra believed that there would be father figures. I think Capra believed in kind of a guy like Capra believed in Capra. Capra believed that somebody like Capra,
heroic individual,
was a heroic individual, and that person needed to stand up against the man. I mean, Capra was... He was kind of a Marxist, but he also...
well, certainly Potter represents capitalism, and and a really stupid caricature of capitalism, too. Oh, Mr. Potter, you've got to keep these men under your thumb so that they keep paying your rent. And,
right. Well, in Capra's private life, he seemed to, if you read his letters and things, despise the working man. Capra doesn't have any affection for Bert and Ernie and those guys and Martini. Like, he sort of... is very paternalistic at best and kind of looks down on them at worst. He thinks you have evil capitalist overlords like Potter or like Claude Rains character in, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Yeah. Or like, there's always a guy like that in Capra movies, generally speaking. There's the evil banker or congressman.
Yep.
You have our evil overlords, and then you have the sheep who are generally, they're cute, maybe, but they're also stupid.
Yep.
And then you have
the heroes that take shots at the man.
Yeah.
Well,
and provide space and refuge and shelter for the sheep.
Yeah, and then they're Mr. Deeds. They're who's the guy that went to Washington? Mr. Smith. I don't know why I keep not being able to pull. They're Clark Gable, and it happened one night. Society is always arrayed against these individuals with a bunch of stupid people on their level, and then the bad guys that are trying to devour the stupid people.
Yeah, in that sense, when you put it that way, and maybe you were going to drive there, and I'm going to steal a point, but Aaron Sorkin is his spiritual successor.
Yes, I wasn't going to drive there, but I think that's a great point. I think, though, Sorkin, unfortunately, is surrounded by a society that ennobles and enables his worst instincts. People let Sorkin tell a story that's as bad as Aaron Sorkin is. Capra, I think, was surrounded by a system and just by people that actually curbed him at his worst instincts. So without saying the death of the author and actually it doesn't matter what Capra's intentions were, I think It's a Wonderful Life is a better movie than what Frank Capra intended it to be. I think all the people playing those supporting parts bring warmth and life and humanity to some pretty thin caricatures.
Sure.
I think even Lionel Barrymore finds a way to make Potter work better than the character of Potter on the page really deserves to work. And I think what's central to why this movie works in spite of some of Capra's worst instincts is that Jimmy Stewart seems like a real mensch. He seems like a real dude. Yeah. And he seems like someone who doesn't... The character of George Bailey pities himself. Jimmy Stewart doesn't seem like he pities George Bailey. You can imagine Tom Hanks or Robin Williams or somebody playing this part and just bringing so much.
Yeah.
Like the actor knows he's playing.
Right?
Yeah,
Would that be the
bathos.
word?
Yeah, I think that is the word. Like they know they're playing a great guy who's being put upon. Yeah, Jimmy Stewart, he never plays it like he's playing a great guy. Jimmy Stewart kind of
he doesn't
himself.
play it with like a Hollywood perspective on himself.
Well, yeah, exactly. George Bailey plays it like a man who thinks his whole life is a miserable failure. He's just got dealt a raw deal. And
which is the appropriate way to play that part. You can see how somebody like Robin Williams is just an obvious example. He would be winking at the audience the whole time saying, "Isn't it sad how my character's been treated this way?"
I always wanted to do something great with my life, and I've been frustrated at every turn. Every time I've had a chance to do something great, the universe has dealt me a blow.
I'm also the sweetest, funniest, most generous guy, and I know it.
Well, that'd be Robin Williams.
That'd be Robin Williams.
But Jimmy Stewart just plays just the straight version of that.
Right.
I wanted to do something great. I could never do anything great. My brother was out doing, I had to stay home and save this stupid building and loan that I hate. While my brother went to college. Oh, he got a job. I had to stay. It's the war. I couldn't go to work because my stupid ear. Oh, I couldn't. I just could never do anything that mattered with my life.
Right.
Yeah.
And he really just believes I could never do anything that mattered with my life. It's stupid. Everything has been stupid. I feel completely impotent and stupid. And now here it is, and this is the end. And it would have been. It really would have been better if I had never been born, because for all my ambition, all my hopes, and all my dreams, what have I done? Except building alone is still going to die, and my wife and kids are going to be left either orphaned or with me in jail. There's just no way out.
Well, and I think the bad version of this movie, and the movie that I think Capra wanted to make, and that somebody like Spielberg would make, is, and actually, George, you're a wonderful guy. You're a hero, and you just need to get on the "you're a hero" train, which is kind of the text of the movie. But I think the actual text of the movie and the way it lands is because, without getting too gospel coalition-y about it, I think the way the movie actually plays is God is merciful, and we all do these things for each other, and we all have
everybody
friends.
matters.
Everybody matters.
Yeah.
And it's not that George Bailey is the white savior American hero that I think Capra thought he was.
Yeah.
It's that George Bailey has just tried in his broken, sinful way to be a good guy, and God has worked through that, and it's good. And he has a lot to be thankful for. He had a wife that caught him where he would have gone bad.
And then the fact is, the only reason there's redemption at the end of that story, apart from we needed redemption, is George married well.
Yeah.
George married well. Yeah.
George's instinct was never to go to the people that he's helped and say, I'm in trouble. His instinct was
to jump off a bridge.
I'm going to go to Potter, and if Potter fails me, then I'm going to jump off a bridge.
Well, what's interesting is that it serves in that sense. I don't know much about Capra, but from what you're saying, the ending of the movie actually works as a rebuke to Capra, because what happens is that it's as though the movie says to you, well, George's real biggest mistake and what blinded him and his pride was he totally underestimated all of these people who loved him. He didn't think they had anything to offer him. He didn't think they could help. He didn't think they would be useful. And they're the ones saving his butt.
And that's why I think we remember this movie. I think we don't remember people like other Capra movies, but it's what's the one with Claudette Colbert? I just said it. The Walls of Jericho.
I don't know.
It happened one night is just about Clark Gable's great. Mr. Deeds is just about Mr. Deeds is great. Mr. Smith is just Mr. Smith is great, and it's a good thing that he exhausted himself on the Senate floor, because otherwise the bad guys would have won.
Yep.
And that sort of says Frank Capra is great, and you as an audience member, you're actually pretty great because you get it. You'd be Mr. Smith. You wouldn't be Claude Rains.
Yeah, if you're cheering for Mr. Smith, then it's because you're awesome like him.
What this movie effectively says, and I think it says it better than Capra intended, is you'd probably jump off the bridge, but it's great.
Be an idiot.
Yeah, it's good that sometimes heaven intervenes for our betterment.
Yeah. It doesn't stroke your ego. That's true.
Yeah.
I think the combination, you can read a lot into why George wouldn't go turn to all these other people.
Sure.
You can read into George is too proud, or George looks down on those people, or George doesn't think that anybody would care.
He has good reasons in it from his own perspective at that moment.
Yeah.
These are the poor people. You can't go and be a burden to them.
Yeah.
What are they
going to do?
That's the text of what he's telling himself. The subtext is, I actually kind of look down on these people. Yeah. I'm always telling them, go bother somebody else. One thing that I think really works in this movie's benefit is that Jimmy Stewart, while he has that aw shucks all American persona, the other thing about Jimmy Stewart in all his best roles, Vertigo, this classic Jimmy Stewart, Philadelphia Story is a great example. He's always sardonic. He's always sarcastic. He's always a little bit hateful. He doesn't actually like people that much. Yeah. And that's George Bailey to a T. George Bailey is always kind of saying, get lost, or
get out of my way.
Or
he loves them in spite of himself.
Yeah, he loves, he does the right thing, but he doesn't actually have a lot of respect for himself, and he doesn't actually have a lot of respect for anybody else. Like, He's a very self-deprecating guy. I just watched, I think it's a great comparison point. Have you guys seen Sergeant York?
It's been a long time.
No, actually.
Yeah. I had
maybe
never,
when I was a little kid.
well, it's worth watching. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
It's really fun. But there's two really interesting comparison points. Number one, Gary Cooper is about 40 and he has to play the whole age range and it sucks. You're just like, why is this old man dating this pretty 20-year-old girl? Like, what is the problem? I'm sorry, Meredith. I know this is one of your favorite movies and I really liked it, but that's my wife out there, folks. But I'm just going to make fun of it for a second because it's got some silliness. And the other thing is it's just got like, you can tell Gary Cooper thinks that Gary Cooper is playing a great part. Sergeant York's a great guy. He's the all-American hero that took that hill by himself. And
he applied his yokel principles of you shoot the geese from behind instead of up front, and you got to wet the tip of your rifle, to take the glare off of it. And all those things that, a good country boy would understand that all these stupid Yankees don't get.
There's a setup scene, Ben, at the beginning of the movie where he has to shoot a goose and nobody else can get the goose to come to pop its head up at the fair or something. And so he does like a gobble sound and the goose comes up. And so what do you know? Wow. He's fighting those Germans and they've all got their heads down and he makes this gobble sound and those dumb
Germans pop their heads up.
Oh no.
Pop their head up and he takes them all
and then
out.
When they're flying in a V, if you shoot the leader, then they all scatter. But if you shoot and work your way from the back to the front, they'll scatter a little, but they'll stay in formation, eye on the leader, and you can pick them all down. So then, there they are in the line. And so you have to, work your way from the back to the front.
And it's a good thing that the military never thought about this.
Yeah.
We needed
a country boy who understood how to hunt geese to do it.
So
a little cringy?
Yeah, it's a little risible at places, to use a $20 word where a $2 word would have done. But it's great. It's wonderful. It also, you have to forgive it a lot.
Sure.
This movie, I think largely because of Jimmy Stewart's and then also because of Donna Reed's performance, there's so much less. You can just imagine recast, put Gary Cooper in there, put, what's his face, Atticus Finch in there, put just a straight shooter guy who's playing to all of George's strengths in the performance, and suddenly it actually loses a lot.
Suddenly can't imagine enjoying it very much.
Yeah.
I'm going to ruin an evergreen here, but it bears on our discussion about the latest episode of The Mandalorian where Carl Weathers is suddenly trying to play a guy who knows he's great when he's actually a scumbag and he needs to know that about himself.
Play the scumbag and let us as the audience discover why we like you. It'll delight us to discover those things. Play likable and we'll be like,
you'll suddenly be the rogue with a heart of gold. But if you decide that you're now the good guy and you've got to lean into what you think are the good qualities about this scoundrel, then nobody's going to follow you there.
I didn't see that episode yet. So.
Yeah. Well, it's terrible. And you can listen to our thoughts on it at patreon.com/Sanity at the Movies, folks.
Oh, man.
Yeah, Ben, you're going to have to sign up if you want to know more of our thoughts. Shall we go through this sucker? So my first thought, I was reading, there's a film critic that I like on the internet called Glenn Erickson. He actually works in the industry as an editor, I think, and reviews Blu-rays and DVDs and stuff like that. He has this theory, which can't be substantiated at this point because everyone's dead, but he thinks that this movie was actually written with a straightforward timeline and that Capra found the flashback structure in the editing. And there's only circumstantial evidence. Capra was Capra wasn't that great of a guy. Capra, his autobiography was self-promoting and told all the legends. Self-aggrandizing, yeah. So, a lot of the legends that we have about this movie, that it made no money and all these kinds of things, it didn't do well, but it did okay-ish. It wasn't like nobody liked it at the time. It was nominated for Academy Awards and stuff like that. Like, it's not like nobody realized this movie was great until 1976 when it started playing on TV. It's just that more people realized it was great. So anyway, a lot of the legends that Capra tells about himself are not helpful. Capra always printed the legend, and so it's hard to get a straight, to quote from another Jimmy Stewart movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's hard to get a straight story on what happened here. But what we do know is that Capra and Stewart despaired. They thought that they did not have a movie. They just thought this is not working. And it only came together near the end. What we also know is that if you examine the footage that opens the movie, it's obviously taken from B-roll stuff. You can actually see, and I'm sorry if this ruins anything, but you can actually see Jimmy Stewart run out of the shot in the background of just one of the establishing shots of people praying for George Bailey. Like, they obviously grabbed some footage from the end.
Interesting.
Actually. And maybe that's just because they didn't have all the coverage. There's any number of reasons why that could be. The other thing that Capra's on record is saying is he didn't want to do a movie. There was a whole genre of I died before my time, and I think Here Comes Mr. Jordan is a famous one. Heaven Can Wait. There's like A Matter of Life and Death. There's a whole bunch of movies from that era where people died and then came back and had to deal with angels and work their way through the bureaucracy of heaven. Like, it was kind of a shtick that people had.
Yep.
And Capra really didn't want to do that. This film critics' theory is that we're going to actually, the way the movie was conceived is we'll just go through it chronologically. It'll just be a story of this guy's life leading up to this critical moment. And then we'll have this crazy old coot jump into the river and he'll rescue him. And then Clarence will say he's an angel.
And we'll never know.
And we'll never really know. And we'll actually have Jimmy Stewart deny it. Maybe the moment that Clarence disappears would be our confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually does make sense. You could see how that they conceived of the movie, put it together that way. You can see why it didn't play that way. And you can see, I mean, it makes sense of the really chintzy special effects. Like, why not? If you write the script, why not just start in heaven with some characters talking? Why? It makes so much sense now because we're used to the movie. But if you imagine just writing a screenplay, would you say the camera pans through some celestial bodies and then we see some stars twinkling as we hear narration for 5 minutes? Or those weird freeze frames where Jimmy Stewart,
I want a big one.
Yeah.
Look at that face.
I love that freeze frame.
Which is great. Yeah. I mean, it's very Martin Scorsese or something before. I mean, it ends up having kind of almost like a French New Wave kind of a feel, you know.
Yeah.
But
why don't you stop it? Because we could do that with movies.
Exactly.
It's great.
So he thinks that whole structure was imposed on the movie in post, which we have no way of verifying. Capra never would have admitted to having that.
Anything but a brilliant scheme from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, folks, but Capra, he never credited his writers. Every good idea was something that Capra came up with in a moment of brilliant inspiration. Nice. You know, him and Jimmy Stewart. Capra was just that kind of a guy. Capra was very invested in the legend of Capra, for better or worse. Which I suppose if you make movies like he did, you sort of have to have some kind of relationship with your audience. I mean, he had a brand and he needed to live up to that. I suppose we can have some sympathy for that.
Yeah.
This critic thinks the whole structure was imposed in post, which
it's interesting.
I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that the movie, I don't know that the movie would actually work without the structure?
That's hard to imagine.
We have to know that it's going somewhere. That tension and pressure has to be there, set up from the beginning. Otherwise, it's hard to see. I think you get lost. You'd get lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you would too. I think you'd be like, well, why do I care about this again?
Yeah, why do I care about this guy?
Now he's not a kid anymore, and what?
Where's this going?
Yeah.
Yeah, you need that tension and pressure set up from the beginning.
The closest comparison that struck me to this movie of other dramatic works I've seen was actually Our Town, the play.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I think I've actually seen it on stage, but it's been a long time.
I like Our Town a lot. I wouldn't say I enjoy it as much as It's a Wonderful Life, but it has the same kind of thing where you have a narrator telling you, hey, we're going to watch all these scenes from small town life.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that, and that like actually imposes dramatic tension.
Right.
It makes it feel organic even. You're just watching strung together scenes of family and a choir practice and stuff and the play. Same thing with this movie.
Yeah, you need a conceit or something some engine that feels like
holds it together.
It's driving through.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think of that silly scene that takes place in heaven?
I always thought it was dumb, even as a kid.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
I think for me, this movie I really lock into this movie emotionally with Mr. Gower.
Oh man,
this movie. Once Mr. Gower happens, I'm in tears, and the movie's started.
Yeah. Oh, that scene,
all that kind of stuff that gets us there. I suppose you have to have it, but
I don't mind it now. I feel like it's fun to see all those little kids on the ice and realize that the movie, for the most part, is being honest when it's like naming the little boys as they go, here's this person. And the movie's honest with that because it's going to give you some payoff with that character.
Yeah.
Even the side characters. The only one who really kind of disappears forever is Mary's brother, which is an odd character to disappear.
Yeah, it almost feels like he must have had something.
He has something. The last thing he has is like the war. He takes a bridge or something.
Oh, right. Yeah.
In the stock when his acting is superimposed on the stock footage.
Yes, that's amazing.
But I don't even know.
Everybody, but
I don't even know if he shows up at George's salvation party or whatever at the end. He might not. So the movie disappears him, which is weird, and like didn't seem like it was thought out that well. But otherwise, all those little characters.
Yeah, we track. I mean, they give Sam Wainwright a fun little gimmick to help you track him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They give everybody. I thought of one of the things that I think is silly is George McFly goes back in time and there's another Biff. Like every generation of Biff.
I love that.
Biff is just like this reoccurring
He's like
natural
an archetype.
phenomenon.
I love that about
the archetypal. Like the Western town is going to have its Biff. And I've never seen it, but I've been told if you watch the animated Back to the Future show that they did around that time, they go to Rome and there's
a Biff.
You know? You go to Africa, there's always going to be, like, every time has its Biff. Which
that's hilarious.
This has the same kind of feeling, though, of, well, Violet was always that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, like, she always had one character trait, and unfortunately for her, it was that. She wanted to, what's wrong with kissing all the boys?
You like every boy. What's wrong with
that?
And Mary Hatch always loved George Bailey. I don't know. I suppose it's fable. Like,
and George is always completely indifferent.
Yeah.
Say brainless.
Yeah, say brainless.
Don't you know where coconuts come from? Fiji Island. See?
Yeah, George.
Oh, a new magazine. I've never seen it. Of course you haven't. Only us explorers.
Get it.
I've been nominated for membership in the National Geographic Society.
That's awesome. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, I don't want.
They want you to pay for a subscription. Is that what?
I don't want to deduct any points for that. I don't.
No. I think it's awesome.
And it lets you track this small town. Having Violet just be such a type. Violet is always Violet. Like, it lets you track Violet better than if she was a more developed character. This movie needs archetypes and it needs stereotypes. Like Mr. Martini being as Mr. Martini-ish as he is.
Yeah,
only helps this movie.
Well, but then, even then you get counterweights, right? So Mr. Martini can be super Italian, stereotype, whatever. And then Mr. Potter is going to tell George that all the stupid poor people he takes care of are a bunch of garlic eaters.
Right.
And so every time they throw a stereotype, I mean, I don't know that this is actually true, but it feels like every time they throw a stereotype at you, there's always some kind of counterbalance.
No, that's true. Even with Violet being, what's the polite way of saying it? A floozy. She's going to show up and say,
this old thing?
I don't want to go. I prefer small town life. I'm not going to go to the big city. I'll make it work in Bedford Falls.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She'd rather be a big fish in a little pond.
Right. Yeah.
And that brings some humanity to her.
Great choice, Violet. By the way, I think she's right. Oh man, the character of Violet. I love Gloria Graham. She always got stuck playing those parts. She's famous for "I'm just a girl who can't say no." In Oklahoma, she played that part. And the press of the wonderful misogynist press actually gave her the nickname of the "Can't Say No Girl," which stuck with her whole life. And
poor girl.
She lived down to it. I mean, she, even apart from making that song famous, deserved it. She was Violet. I mean, but it's always fun to see her pop up in things. Her best role is, there's a Humphrey Bogart movie that's really interesting and sad called In a Lonely Place. A film noir where she plays the girl, and that's a mature, developed role for her where she's not just playing a floozy. But I recommend that movie. If you want something that's a real downer, then
Great. I already feel depressed talking about her life.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So, okay, we've made it through exactly one scene in this movie. We have the heavenly
bodies.
controversy. Do you guys have any theories? I was thinking of this. I cannot think of any exceptions to this rule. Heaven, when it's portrayed on film, I mean, every once in a while it'll be like a white place with angels or something
And
like that.
Foggy clouds.
Like Bill and Ted are going to go to heaven. It's going to be like a white fog. Like that's kind of the
Or
comedy place.
Heaven Can Wait.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of... So I can think of two ways that I've seen heaven and angels portrayed, and they're the only really the two ways. Number one, a benevolent-ish bureaucracy, which is what this is. Kind of a boys club style Mad Men kind of, but without any of the bad stuff from Mad Men, just like a very nice corporate place.
Yeah.
That you have, and you kind of have to work your way through the corporate levels in order to get to see management. There's that version of heaven. Any movie in this genre, which if people don't know, I think the people like to call this film blanc as opposed to film noir. Film noir shows us the seedy underside of ourselves. Film blanc is the opposite. It uplifts us and makes us happy and shows us that heaven is on our side and all that sort of thing. It's touched by an angel, these kinds of things. So heaven's always either a bureaucracy, like a benevolent sort of bureaucracy, or it's some kind of a weird existential kind of thing, like What Dreams May Come or Wings of Desire or City of Angels. You know, it'll be like this. You have to find yourself and find your happy spot within this kind of hippie thing. You know, Tree of Life, those kind of Terrence Malick movies. It'll be like some kind of hippie existential crap. That's one way of doing heaven. And the other way is benevolent bureaucracy. And I was trying to think for like, why are those the two things that 20th century and 21st century people have locked into as far as the popular conceptions? Like,
because we're all statists.
Yeah, you could do an easy, like, you know, Marxist read on this or something, but
right. Are we Democrats or are we Republicans?
Right. You could say it's a very Republican view of, you know, big corporate, you know, for a guy that looks down on corporations, Capra is going to present heaven as a benevolent corporation, where Clarence wants to move up the ladder and get his wings. And Mr. Potter would be in favor of running heaven that way, only he'd never give anybody their wings. So
that was my theory. All a reflection of our politics.
Our bourgeois identity.
We're projecting our political framework onto heaven.
Maybe it's a convenient way of, they have enough respect they don't actually want to make God into a character, generally speaking.
I think that's part of it.
So
if you think about what the blocks of the Catholics would have done if they tried to, or even just a good evangelical, like, we wouldn't watch this movie.
No. Yeah.
I feel bad not making an apology or having some kind of argument about whether or not we should watch it to begin with because of its depictions.
I think we did in our other episode.
We did, yeah.
We did, and I'm glad that we did, but it's a fairy tale, and
it's basically the same argument that we made for Gandalf and our Should Christians Listen to Fantasy SOS. You have to detach yourself from this having any sort of actual theological, or this is not about life. It's the same thing as a folk tale where the devil, quote unquote, shows up. We're not talking about the devil with a capital D. We're talking about the trickster Loki kind of figure from folklore. And should they have the same names? Probably not, but can we give that an uneasy pass as mature?
I always say there's things that Christians can enjoy that they couldn't write, they couldn't make.
Yeah.
So could you use a sort of Catholic light version of heaven as a fairy tale heaven for It's a Wonderful Life? If you were Frank Capra's screenwriter, I don't think I could. No,
I couldn't. I mean, I would just make some changes. I'd just make them ghosts or benevolent beings of some.
Yep.
But it's the Christmas spirits or something.
Yep.
I actually feel better about Charles Dickens because his mythology is so divorced from truth. It's that it doesn't really step on our toes.
His specters are like, we're allegory.
Yeah. Hi. Exactly.
I am not real. I may, in fact, be a bit of underdone potato. Who's to say? What matters is what happens in your heart through this weird dream sequence that you're about to go through.
I represent your dread of a future where you continue to be an evil man.
Right. Hi, I'm death. I'm your death. Boy. So, all right, we're on to the snow scene. He saves his brother on an obviously stage-bound set that is not a real forest with a real pond. And I really like that, actually. I think the stage-boundiness of some of this, of a few parts of this movie, actually add to that kind of...
I felt the whole way through, I would love to see a quality stage adaptation of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I kept feeling that. When it comes to, especially like a holiday movie that you're going to see over and over and over again, I don't know. Like, I feel like this is a movie that just deserves a story. And I know we've talked about how much Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed are what make it work and hold it together.
But it has that kind of elemental power, like a Hamlet or something. Like you could see, let's let this guy give his interpretation. Let's see if Hanks can bring it. Let's see.
I would go see, part of me was thinking I would kind of rather go see a different interpretation live on stage somewhere of this every year. Something like that. Like, or at least every once in a while. That would be fun.
Yeah. Is there not?
And I was,
I don't think so.
and I don't know what maybe there are rights issues or whatever. If there are no rights issues, then I say that we cast our Sanityville characters one year and try it. Not on stage, but for radio drama. See if we can.
Man, that makes me feel pretty intimidated, I have to say.
The fact that we would have Sparky
Jake.
play George Bailey.
I'm shaking the dust of this crummy old town off my boots.
Exactly. I'm going to see the world.
That money's in Bill's house. Wow.
Well, you certainly couldn't have Matt and Erica be George and...
Oh man, that's terrifying.
No.
To even contemplate.
It is terrifying. There's musical adaptations.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a live radio play somewhere. I'm not seeing... hold on. Yeah, there are stage adaptations.
Could you make Chip and Claire George and Mary, or would it have to be Lance and Laura?
I think it'd probably have to be Lance and Laura.
It would have to be Lance and Laura. Yeah.
I do think the stage boundiness of this whole thing, of this whole endeavor, adds to it. I think this movie would actually be quite a bit worse if those woods looked completely real. If Bedford Falls seemed like just a completely real town. I think there's enough stuff that's played real and played straight, but having some moments that feel blatantly artificial, even the stupid
what plays into the whole fantasy aspect of it all feels just more fairy tale and fantastical, because it doesn't matter. What we're actually dealing with are the character moments, the character beats.
And I think the black and white helps for that. I think everything conspires to make this more of an abstraction.
I think I watched a colorized version of that once, and
it's
never ever again.
Jimmy Stewart testified in Congress that it shouldn't happen. What's his face? The guy that what is his name? Rupert Murdoch bought the rights and created a colorized version. Actually, he didn't buy the rights because it had lapsed out of copyright. Rupert Murdoch created a colorized version for TBS or TBN or whichever, not TBN, but whatever station.
TNT.
The TNT. Yeah, they were charging to show the colorized version, where TV stations could play the black and white version for free, because it's the black and white version that had lapsed out of copyright, but the colorized version were copyrighted. So people were paying more money for an inferior product.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Stewart actually went before Congress and said in his inimitable Jimmy Stewart fashion that
I don't understand why that comes to Congress. I don't get it.
Because it was probably if you think of movie copyright and things like that, it just was unlegislated. That'd be my unlegislated, unregulated, how these things would happen. So you'd have to make an appeal to Congress to intervene and say, this is a new scenario. This isn't something that our copyright laws have, really cover. And it can be argued in courts, but also it needs to be regulated or legislated. I mean, I'm sure that that's the context, right?
Yeah, I don't have all the details right in front of me. I don't remember exactly, but it was kind of like the famous footage you can find of Mr. Rogers asking for more money for
PBS
for children's programming for public television. Jimmy Stewart went and sort of did his Mr. Smith thing to
so probably what Rupert Murdoch did was totally within his rights based on available law, and somebody had to go make a case for the laws to change or new laws and regulations to be written to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
It's an interesting story, and we don't have to go into all of it, but if you're interested, folks, you can look it up. The movie fell out of copyright, and then it began to be shown on TV, and then it became a perennial Christmas favorite. Basically, this movie has the fact that it's so iconic and beloved is directly due to the fact that there was a copyright lapse. It shouldn't have fallen out of copyright. Something from its era wouldn't have naturally fallen out of copyright. It was a mistake or a problem. Somehow, the rights were regained, and it was, I don't even know what studio got it back, but they had to do this weird thing where they circled back around and said, we have rights to the soundtrack, or we have rights to this aspect or the screenplay. They had to do a trick. And so it got withdrawn from public domain in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now it's not in the public domain. And I actually think that that's helped its reputation. I think people my age really love A Christmas Story, but I feel like maybe it's not getting passed down because it's been so commodified and become so ubiquitous that the people directly younger than us resent it, kind of like, oh, this is the dumb thing that gets played all the time that we can't get away from.
I actually resent it.
Yeah.
I don't love it. I resent it. It's the thing that, to me, I have memories of being just stupid, high pressure, high tension environments on Thanksgiving or whatever, and it's just, that's what's on TV, and we're all supposed to like this.
Right.
And it's a good movie. I can objectively say that it's a fun movie and it's a good Christmas movie, but I never want to watch it. I don't want to show it to Mike. I just resent it.
You're kind of the target. You're the demographic that discovered that movie and
loved it and
locked into it.
Yeah, but I identify with, any younger generation or whoever feels oppressed by that movie, and not a huge fan.
Well, there's always that wonderful feeling when something's not popular of discovering it. I remember discovering the VHS of Shawshank Redemption. Now Shawshank Redemption is just everybody has to watch the Shawshank Redemption. It's not as special. Same thing. I think It's a Wonderful Life, actually. Everything, the stars just aligned perfectly because it became ubiquitous. Everybody locked into it and said, this is great. This is a Christmas classic. And then just at the right time, it became not ubiquitous and it reserved some of its specialness. It actually can't play on TV ad nauseum. People have to pay for it, which means it does show up every year, of course, but it's more along the lines of something like A Wizard of Oz or something like that, where it's an event when, I mean, nothing's an event anymore on TV because we all have streaming, but it's like you have to take a step to watch the movie. You can't just see it everywhere like you do with Christmas Story or certain other things. How on earth did we get onto all of that? Oh, I was just saying the black and white really works for this movie. It really, and the chintzy special effects and some of the stuff like that. It makes it more elemental. It makes it more symbolic. It's the same thing with Casablanca. Starts with that stupid model globe, and then our heroes are going to be outside an airport that's going to be represented by a spotlight that's just going to randomly. It's like, this is all an abstraction. This is not how it would feel to be in Casablanca. This is a set with a spotlight.
Yep.
But it becomes universal precisely because it's not specific. We lose a lot, I think, in modern movies when we demand realism in our special effects and in our sets. There's a kind of artifice that actually draws us deeper into the story. And that's what something a lot of these old movies
what's
have.
frustrating is that the people who understand or seem to understand that are just gross. And so they end up doing like
Wes Anderson.
That's exactly what I was like Wes Anderson or even a Tim Burton or I was imagining some of the same stuff maybe in the way you were describing the modern Emma. A certain kind of like whimsy that's actually just super self-absorbed and not actually about
I think
that is
serving
true.
the purpose of the story, but it just feels narcissistic or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I like bold style choices, and I like when people don't feel bound by realism, but there is something self-absorbed about Wes Anderson, about Tim Burton, about that Emma movie, all of which I like. But what's maybe different here is that it's not like they're trying. They're not rubbing your face. Like Tim Burton's like, it's fake. It's you're in my head. You've entered into the Burton land.
Well,
Isn't it magical?
And here they're constrained by limitations, and so they've got to.
Yeah, they're just telling a story. And Bedford Falls happens to be a little bit different than the real Bedford Falls would be. There's things that become symbolic. It's like Casablanca. They're not trying to. Citizen Kane is obviously the other one that I'm thinking of, where so much of it is smoke and mirrors. A lot of it's just because they're trying to hide the fact that they don't have infinite resources. But it ends up creating this kind of dream space where the story is not tethered to a particular reality. Bedford Falls can become the platonic ideal of every small town in a way that it couldn't if there was more realism and specificity to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we're up to the Mr. Glower scene.
Gower.
Mr. Gower, yeah, not Mr. Glower.
That's because he glowers.
He glowers.
George.
Yeah.
That's true.
Which is a devastating scene.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
I don't know what else to say about it besides I thought, I'm not going to cry at this old canard again. And it's just like...
Yes, you are.
It is so dark and so sad.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, everybody! His son died, so he's super drunk in the back of the store.
Oh.
And he's going to accidentally kill someone by giving him the wrong pills. And George is going to catch the mistake, and then he's going to get beaten until his ear starts bleeding.
Yeah. I knew that I was in for it when I just started losing myself at the Mr. Gower scene, because it was the same thing. It was like, I've been through this before. This is not the place anymore for me to. And then I was like,
yes, it is.
It's like, dang it, this whole movie is not going to go well. Like, I'm not going to.
That scene always gets me, and obviously it's a sad scene, but it gets me in a way that's out of proportion, maybe to my mind, with how sad it is. Like, it feels like the kind of scene that I should be able to watch without being destroyed. That scene always destroys me. It's one of the top two or three destructive scenes in the movie.
Part of why it does that is because it brings Dad into it.
Yeah.
Like, and even if you're not thinking of the text of that, the fact is, you've had all this stuff set up with Violet and Mary, and is this her ear, George Bailey, I'll love you to the day I die, and coconuts and National Geographic Society. All this stuff has happened. And meanwhile, drunken Mr. Gower's George not paid to be a canary, like all that happens. And you've got
Ask Dad
sign. Ask Dad, he knows sign is there the whole time, right? And then George sees it, and he's like going, he's got to get through, and he's going to bust through Uncle Billy, and he's going to get in there with Potter and his dad having this thing happen, and it's establishing all this other stuff that's happening.
And then he's going to kind of brashly push Mr. Potter. I noticed that for the first time this viewing. He actually pushes him. I never saw that before. He's bigger than you. He's bigger than... You get that, like, son pride, but he's let down. Like, and you don't feel bad about Peter Bailey. You don't feel bad about Dad exactly, but Dad doesn't understand the gravity of what's happening. It all falls on George, and he's not even meaning to do anything. He just goes back to the drugstore, has no idea what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of the emotion is you've seen the movie before, so you know this is going to be George Bailey's life. Like, he's always going to do the right thing. There's never, like the Megan's big take, there's never going to be a father figure who can just come in and save the day for him. He's always just going to have to take it on his shoulders, and he's going to be beaten until his ear bleeds.
Well, it's funny that actually Mr. Gower is the second best father figure he has. Maybe actually that might be the most important father-son scene there. Not that he goes to his dad, who can't help him at that moment, but him and Mr. Gower. It's actually like George is being his son.
Yeah.
And George is taking it. Mr. Gower's going to treat George like a son from that.
From then on. They're bonded from that moment on, right?
From then on.
Yeah, it's powerful enough that I almost think the movie misses a beat by not playing into it a little bit more, having a little bit more of a payoff with
Mr.
Gower down the line.
I mean, it tries to in the next scene with, he's the one that buys him the big luggage case and has it monogrammed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a nice through line for Mr. Gower. I'm not really complaining so much as observing that I think the movie actually was more successful in wringing emotion out of that scene than maybe if you knew how hard that scene was going to hit, you might rate the movie more to converge around it a little bit. To capitalize on it. Sentimental.
The movie does such a good job of capitalizing on every one of those moments.
Yeah, exactly.
It stacks all those moments and it's just constantly capitalizing on them.
Yeah.
So you just are like, I kind of like that they didn't come back and because they just moved right on. Like in the next scene, Mr. Gower is still there and he's buying George the thing, but we're back on to Dad and Harry and Mom and
life
Annie,
has moved on. George hit it.
We're gonna have the fun dance scene, and then he and Mary are gonna have a romance, and the house is gonna be there, and then Dad's gonna die.
Yep.
And everything's gonna change, and then that whole Potter thing with him and his dad pays off too, and it's like, well, we've been introduced to him, and now here he is, and now it's George versus Mr. Potter, and Dad's not there.
Yep.
This time, and nobody else is, and nobody else wants to be. Nope. We're selling out unless you take the reins, George.
Yep. The other thing that having a scene that strong at the beginning does is it really justifies Pottersville at the end. Like, we understand this movie needs to set up in some really strong ways if it's not going to be cheesy. If it's not just going to be Back to the Future. If Biff gets the book, then all of civilization falls apart. if this idiot mechanic... You need to constantly through the movie, not just at the very end, but through the movie, you need to see it lurking under Bedford Falls the whole time. You need to understand that this kindly old druggist almost poisoned somebody to death because he was drunk. Violet really is this way. Bert, it's not just in the alternate reality. He actually is the kind of guy that in the wrong situation would just pull out his gun in a crowd and start blasting away. These people... there but for the grace of God go all of them, actually. Oh, that tension is always at play through the whole movie, and that scene sets it up really nicely. It's not just that George Bailey is always has to hold the forces of darkness.
It's not like everyone's basically a decent person.
No.
Then they're going to be okay. Ma Bailey is a sweet old lady. Actually, she could be a completely bitter, nasty, horrible
old lady. You know what? If her only son died... as a child, and then her husband died
after sinking his life into a useless venture,
and then useless brother,
and runs the business into the ground, and what she left with, and so there are 1,000 little grace notes in all of our lives that keep it from sinking to the Pottersville alt reality. In as much as it wants to pin all of those grace notes in Bedford Falls on one man, okay, it's not true. But it's still true. It's
a good fable. It's a good way of saying we all have those things.
Yeah, and it's also a good way of pointing out that sometimes there are those kinds of people, actually. And, that's why you brought up our friend who died not long ago. He really feels like one of those kinds of people. Like he just really did mean that much to that many people.
He held up a lot of things.
Everybody felt he was special to them. Sometimes... there are people that are like that.
Right. And, we don't have to make a bigger deal out of it than it is. We don't have to be the Gospel Coalition and, see the gospel in this movie. But insofar as this movie is morally instructive and helpful, it's because it makes you want to be that kind of person. And because it makes you, just for a second, nobody can watch this movie without thinking, oh boy, I'm glad that God smiled here or there on my life. I'm glad I have this wife. I'm glad I have this job. I complain about it all the time, but boy, imagine what my life might be like if I didn't have X, Y, or Z.
And then, getting back to what we were saying earlier, because George is such a bad person, so angry, doesn't actually love people, so human, so everymanish. You don't come away with this, you kind of says, I kind of am George Bailey, and I kind of can be that for people from time to time, even if I suck. It's possible, to make a to be as bad as I know I am.
Yeah,
and still make some kind of difference.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I don't like things like To Kill a Mockingbird as much. The movie version, I mean, you watch that and you're just like, well, I could never be Gregory Peck. I'm not Gregory Peck.
Right.
You watch this, and it's like, well, I guess I could complain and take it out on my wife sometimes and kind of be a jerk, but
still do the right thing. Most of the time.
And God could smile on that and make something out of it. Maybe I'll never be as great as the movie points George Bailey, but I could sure try.
Yeah. I can try to live in such a way that if I was in trouble, people who loved me would want to help.
We fast forward to George's life. We get that awesome Scorsese freeze frame of,
I want a big one.
And then we have Clarence say, "Oh, I like him," or something like that.
I like him. I like George Bailey.
Yeah, I deduct points for that. That's laying it on a little thick movie. If we're allowed to admit that there's some things, there are maybe 3 moments I'm going to say are less than perfect in this movie.
Okay,
I'll just go ahead and say them. I think when he shakes Mr. Potter's hand and then looks at his hand and he's got slime on it, that's stupid. Too far. Come on, movie. You can come up with something better than...
Well, but...
I don't know that I mind that.
So you can see actually shaking Potter's hand being a turning point. I mean, he looked at it.
Yeah, it's really the look. It's like the look. Oh, there's slime on my hand that I don't...
Yeah, but if he had just stopped while shaking Potter's hand, I don't know. I don't mind him noticing.
I think that plays.
But yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how much I mind. I feel like part of the deal with George is like we said already, he doesn't play himself like someone who knows how great he is or how bad he is.
Mm-hmm.
He just plays himself like someone who keeps forgetting himself.
Right.
And he doesn't have propriety, really. Like, he doesn't have the right way of dealing with Potter.
Right.
He just will lose it with him. And I feel like that moment is like him being like, what?
Well,
I don't know.
I think it really helps to understand, to go back and actually translate, which I did. I don't think I've ever done this before, but to translate the offer that Potter is making, it's an 855% pay increase. George says, I make $45 a week. He's willing to pay him $20,000 a year. And that's just the base pay apart from, business trips and whatever. That's an 855% pay increase. And so if you make 100, that's being offered $855,000 a year. If you make 50, or 60, that's like being offered $450,000, $500,000 a year. That's stupid money. That's hard money to turn down.
Yeah.
And then George is going to have to go home after walking away from that and hear that his wife's pregnant.
Maybe the reason I don't like it, it's not because any of the things that are intrinsic to it that you guys are describing are bad. I just think the movie doesn't trust me as an audience member to get them without Jimmy Stewart holding his hand up and looking at it.
Yeah.
I think if you just play it 4% more subtly.
Maybe you're right. To me, I fold it into what I understand about George.
Yeah.
And you, So I'll
he hits things like this hard. He doesn't have any. I think that's a good read. He's never been able to deal with Mr. Potter in a good way. Like if you were Mary, you'd be at home saying, George, you've got to be civil to Mr. Potter when you see him on the street. You can't give him a giant Jimmy Stewart speech about how he's a warped, frustrated old man every time you guys run into each other. It's not accomplishing anything. Can you stop being such a blowhard?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, George is just the kind of guy, he doesn't really know how to deal with this level of evil. And so his mode is yell at it or try to appease it. And he tries to appease it for a second and then he just gets to the willies.
Well, but then if you think about it, like how many times, the only way to get through something and come out on the right side is to overcompensate.
Yep. Oh, yep.
Right. Like, you have to have some kind of fight or conflict. And so you go in with guns blazing because you're afraid of what'll happen if you don't. You back yourself into a corner, you shoot yourself in the foot by throwing it all out there on the table and blustering big and going hard. And then you can come back and kind of find yourself and moderate down the line, right? Like everybody does things like that in their lives. And so when you have somebody like a Mr. Potter who owns the whole town and has conquered everybody, including the banks, like how do you take, your weak position into a room with somebody who has all the cards, except like with your fists high and kind of like an idiot,
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you think about it that way, like,
no, I think that plays. I still don't really need the look at the hand.
I agree with you. I kind of cringed a little bit when I saw it too. I noted it as a thing that was like, oh,
Thanks, movie.
Thanks.
I'm an idiot.
It's like, actually, you know what? I'd seen it a million times, but I was figuring out again, and I wasn't remembering. I was figuring out again what's the moment, and it's going to be like when he touches his hand, his cold old man hand, that he would never.
Right.
He's going to realize he's just shook hands with the devil.
Right. Maybe if Mr. Potter was actually played 5% more sympathetically, the moment would land too. If you actually knew that George was overcompensating there because Potter, in fact, wasn't the devil, he was just a warped and frustrated old man. But the movie kind of plays Mr. Potter as the devil.
Oh, yeah.
So, and therefore that moment kind of plays like, oh no, I've got sulfur on my hand. I've got the slime.
I mean, we just came from George Bailey is creating prosperity among the working class, and it's devastating to your business. You need to keep them under your thumb in the slums, paying rent. And he's like trying to figure out what to do about it. And the next thing is, George, you're a bright young man. The whole kingdom.
You have beaten me, George.
That's awesome.
I can't think of any other examples of this off the top of my head, but anytime a villain has to try and play straight or play avuncular and they really suck at it.
You've beaten me,
George. He's trying to put on his angel mask for a second and just failing miserably. kind of makes you love Mr. Potter.
Yeah.
I also like that he also, part of the sophistication of that scene is he still shows some teeth. Like
Potter
does. Potter's still like
so-called. Is that the scene where he says
no. That's the funeral scene.
Room.
He's like portraying some sour grapes about the fact, like, and some like, your stupid building and loan's been a thorn in my side and I hate it, is sort of the attitude. And I can't.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, hey, George, I'm leveling with you. I am kind of nasty, but I'm leveling with you. We can talk, you and I.
Yeah, I am.
Which is a better pitch, a smarter pitch from Potter than it would be.
Exactly, yeah. It's just that layer of sophistication. Yep, I am kind of the nasty person you think I am, but I know when I've lost.
Okay, so George has the conversation with his dad. I think that's, like you want a shock pop? I think you're a great guy. That whole...
It's about time one of you two lugheads said it.
Racial stereotyping at its finest.
Yeah.
What's that character's name?
Annie. Did you hear that, Annie?
Why don't you pull up a chair, Annie?
Be more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
I would if I thought I'd hear anything worth saying, or whatever she says.
That's right. Something like that. Yeah.
Well, there again, Jimmy Stewart plays it just right, because you could tell, he's got an affectionate, kidding relationship with Annie, but he was also probably been a thorn in her side as a little kid, growing up and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And with his dad, they love each other. It's sentimental, but it's not corny. George is complaining about the shabby old town and
the shabby. I couldn't be cooped up in a shabby old office. And,
really hurting his dad's feelings without.
Yeah, and then dad's just sort of taking it.
Yeah, just being real stoic. It's not just you want a shock pop. I think you're a great guy. It's a lot of other things that get us there.
Yeah,
which saves this movie from being corny in the way that some people. I just don't think this movie is corny. I think
it's not.
There's a handful of moments. The shake with Mr. Potter. What was the one that even got us to talking about that?
Something with Clarence, probably.
Well, it's where Clarence says, "I like George Bailey." That one never bothered me either. But it's because Clarence is corny.
Well, Clarence is corny,
like the movie
and
tells you so.
Jimmy Stewart actually lives up to it. Jimmy Stewart is that likable. At the end of the day, there is just something about having a true movie star playing the part, and Jimmy Stewart, you just like him. He made a lot of money off of that fact. He made a career out of the fact that you look at him and you like him. That is why we pay Jimmy Stewart, and why we continue to support his family or whoever makes rights off of the royalties. So it just kind of works.
Yeah, just kind of. This isn't racially sensitive or whatever, but whenever you have someone who lives in your house and is the help, or maybe not lives in your house, but who's there, they become a part of the family.
Yeah.
And you can tell that Annie has her own opinions about everything,
And can express them.
And can express them and supports the discipline of the parents on the children. You can tell all those things, and I think that that's sweet. And that's not a demeaning way to portray someone who's a servant in your house.
I don't think it's demeaning at all. You can see it as a white-black power dynamic if you want, but if you want to flip on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, you can see Jeffrey, the black butler, in a black home, fulfilling the same kind of function.
Or Alice in the Brady Bunch.
In the Brady Bunch, exactly.
It's a stock type, and it's a stock type that doesn't just belong to the antebellum South and Gone with the Wind, all that sort of thing. It belongs to a French drawing room comedy. It belongs to plays like The Servant, who is in the place of observer and commenter, the Greek chorus.
Yeah.
This goes back to Sophocles and Euripides and these guys.
Well, it's what Woodhouse riffs on, even.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Woodhouse is making a joke out of Jeeves actually is the agent, not the...
Yeah, but
That's right.
But it's because that's a type that goes way back.
The butler who just kind of comments, is there to comment or there to...
Yeah, and you see it in Shakespeare.
Exactly. He's just there to tell you something about George or something about his dad.
Yeah.
This movie, by the way, is so generous with... I don't think a modern movie stacks the story with as many great little supporting characters just to add color.
Well, they do such a good job with creating these little colorful characters that move in and out that, when they parade them for you at the end of the movie, like
it's like you grew up with them.
Yeah, you get that same sense that
crazy.
It really evokes that feeling that George would have at that moment. Right? Like
this is my family.
I remember. I remember this. And then they all have their little moment. Like, I was saving this up for divorce in case I ever had a husband. Like what a great little, in writing, keeping with just like the sass that they developed for Annie and that one little scene around the table.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier, Jake, you wouldn't mind being a supporting, just playing a bit role in this on stage.
I think it'd be super fun.
Well, it would be fun. And it's because the bit roles are all fun. You watch like I don't know what a good example is, but you watch a modern movie and it's written to make Tom Cruise and 2 or 3 other people look good. Yeah. Somebody like Jimmy Stewart is so selfless in that the jokes, he knows he's going to look good if the movie looks good, if the story looks good, if the character, if we lock into the story, then that's what makes Jimmy Stewart look good and makes Jimmy Stewart get a bigger paycheck next time. And so he doesn't have to have the punchline. He almost never has the punchline in the scene. It'll always be, no matter how emotional the situation is, there'll be some dumb observer. The guy, kiss her already. You got that guy. You got
Bert and Ernie.
You got Bert and Ernie, who are wonderful. You have the random guy that's there to react to Clarence after they're, the guy that's just going to fall out of his seat. That guy is stealing moments where Jimmy Stewart could be charming.
Giving the face,
where Clarence could be providing the color. But the movie's like, we don't need that. We need the townsfolk to all provide the color and the charm.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, you watch Casablanca and the generosity of, or Citizen Kane, any of the great movies that we remember from the studio system. They just had the stable of actors and they would give them all something fun or cute or interesting to do. And it brings so much life and vitality.
Well, the only thing really to compare that with now is certain like modern sitcoms, like The Office or Community.
Yeah, I think those are good comparison points.
Right,
yeah.
where you have this stable of actors. They're gonna be at least in the background every episode. Not even every episode will you get them. Maybe they'll have one speaking line an episode, and then some episodes you'll give them a bunch of speaking lines, but usually not.
Right,
but they'll always be there and provide the context and the color.
But The Office is a great comparison point because you have characters that really are archetypes or types at the very least.
Right.
And so you can't sustain a whole episode with this lady, but you can cut to her for her one joke. and that's how a movie like this works. We have people at the time and even us today, I think we have sort of relationships with these character actors because we've seen them in other things. They always play the same kinds of parts.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, we're going to cut to this guy and he's going to do his thing. He plays the gruff but lovable cop. He plays the avuncular Uncle Billy kind of Violet. I mean, Gloria Graham's a good example. Everybody knew her as the tart of the time.
Yeah.
And so she comes and does her tarty thing and we score a couple points off of that.
Yeah.
And then we move on with our lives. Gloria Graham doesn't have to be the star of the movie.
But that's just so much fun.
Yeah.
I really love it.
Yeah.
I really, really love it. And, when you watch an old movie like that and you can think to yourself, I mean, not that lots of people have this thought, but wouldn't it be fun to play Bert,
Right.
or to play Ernie, or to play Martini, or to play Mr. Gower, or to play whatever? Like, wouldn't that be fun? Like, and what you're not thinking is, wouldn't it be fun to play George Bailey? No, it'd be really hard to play George Bailey.
Really
That's
hard.
what you think. And man, the only person you would ever imagine yourself trying to play is the lead,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Like,
and you hear all these stories about,
because everybody else is a zero.
yeah, well, you hear stories about like the color is in the scene, and then Cruz or Pitt or whoever it is gets on set, and they say, well, that's a good line. Don't you kind of think that Ethan Hunt would actually say that line? And what can the director and everybody do but say, yeah, I guess
so.
I guess Ethan Hunt would have the punchline in this scene. I guess that makes sense. But it's so much more richer of a world when you don't have the hero always have to do everything and provide his own own color. It's a piece of writing advice that I've always tried to keep in mind that Raymond Chandler gave when he was talking to, so they were adapting Philip Marlowe into a radio show. And you can read a letter that Chandler wrote to the radio writers about how to write Marlowe. And Marlowe, of course, is a famous quipster, kind of tough guy character. And Chandler said, Marlowe should never have the blow to a scene. He should never end. He should never get the last word because people are going to resent that. It's going to just make him into a wish fulfillment hero. Whereas you have him on his heels, you have him always get one-upped in the scene. People are going to really love the character. And when the character scores, when you want to give him a great line, it's going to feel really potent. It's going to feel like, yeah, he just connected that punch because he's not doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it feels like it was just wrung out of him in the moment when he finally just like dunks on somebody.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think somebody like Aaron Sorkin doesn't quite understand. Like if everybody's dunking on everybody all the time, then actually nobody's
dunking on anybody at all. Maybe we've just put in 6 foot hoops.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's nothing impressive about anything that's going on here.
Yeah, we put gutter guards in our bowling lane, so everybody's getting strikes. Wow.
Exactly,
It's the moral of The Incredibles. Come home to roost or something.
Yeah, exactly.
When everyone's super,
It's Anne
one will
Reindian.
be.
Yeah. You can have witty stories where everyone has something colorful or interesting to do, and where the hero has a lot of colorful, interesting, witty things to do. This is one of them. It's a Wonderful Life is a wonderfully dense, literate, witty script, but we don't pile it all onto George Bailey. We give moments where he doesn't really know what to do or what to say, and we let other people have the punchline. So it's just it's smart writing, and it's something that people don't do as much anymore. So I think we're to the big dance.
Yep.
The introduction of Donna Reed. I mean, I will just reiterate, it's a tough role that she has to play. She is playing a type. She is playing a symbol. She's not really playing a flesh and blood woman, but she gives a lot of flesh and blood to it.
Yeah, pretty awesome. You get the immortal Alfalfa for a few minutes.
Yeah. That's him, isn't it? Is he the one that's dancing with her?
Yeah.
Well, he's not dancing. He's just like talking her ear
Now to
off.
continue my story.
Why don't you go annoy somebody else?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey! This is great.
Once again, George, not a very nice guy, actually.
No. And you appreciate him for it. Like, get this little twerp out of her life.
I oftentimes don't like it in this era or into the 50s. Like Howard Hawks, the great director, he always made the woman pursue the man because he thought that was more interesting and more sort of sexually charged and more alpha male. Like in Rio Bravo, let's have Angela, what's her name? Let's have the leading lady of that movie. I forget what her name is. Policewoman, whatever it is. Go after John Wayne. Let's have her, like it weakens John Wayne to have him pursue the lady. Let's have the lady just be
throwing herself
at him. I oftentimes don't like that because it feels like a macho fantasy of a certain kind of post-war era, frankly. I mean, not to get all like toxic masculinity, but it feels like, yeah, wouldn't that be great if the sexiest woman in the world thought I was great and wanted to throw herself. There's a lot of John Wayne movies. There's a lot of Cary Grant movies. And it does something for Wayne and for Grant's characters in those movies that they're not, especially as they got older and their co-stars stayed the same age. It was a little less creepy. It's one of the ways you solve the problem. And when you have a 25-year-old ingenue and you've got a 60-year-old hero,
A la Tom Cruise.
Have the woman throw herself at him. It's going to feel less creepy that way. If Audrey Hepburn's actually the one that's into Cary Grant. But I don't really like it. I think it works here really well, though, to have Mary know exactly what she wants.
Yep.
And to want George. I think it adds a lot to the story. Maybe just because it culminates with the telephone scene where George is actually frustrated by that.
Yep.
Where it's actually like, nah, George wouldn't actually want you if you really were completely the pursuer. At the end of the day, this movie has enough sense about the way that these kinds of relationships between men and women work. That's going to say, at the end of the day, if you keep doing that, George is going to get angry, feel impotent, and shut it down. But the fact that we get those private moments of Mary, I mean, I think basically the reason I'm thinking of this is because when we introduce her, we see Donna Reed's face in glorious close up.
Yeah.
And she's like,
the little softening touch thing that they do.
Yeah. They would literally put a little filter, like basically a veil over the camera when they shot Pretty Ladies. It's really funny to watch old movies. It'll suddenly go real soft and weird because they didn't have, Instagram filters back then. So they had to put gauze over the camera so that their ladies would look as beautiful as they wanted to. But she smiles and she sees George and she's going to go after him. It humanizes Mary to have her be more of the aggressor in these early scenes. And it humanizes George to have him be a little off of his game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he didn't want to be there in the first place and he didn't want to dance with her. And
he's getting ready to go.
He's getting ready to go off to college and maybe have a little fling or something like that. Is not.
And here's Mary Hatch, the girl that used to annoy him in the soda shop or whatever.
So he's on his heels from the beginning, and then she plays to that. She plays to that all the way through the dance scene, all the way through to, I'm going to walk away and sing Buffalo Gals,
Oh, man, when she tries to bring Buffalo Gals back.
Oh, yeah.
What a painful moment.
Oh, man. And he's so mean about it.
It's awful.
Oh, it's so bad.
Yeah, like George.
It is one of the most painful. Well, it is the most painful scene of the whole movie for that reason. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but
I think it's just one of those embarrassing moments that we've all either accidentally committed that sin or seen somebody else or had it done to us where somebody else put a ton of time and attention and meaning and into something and then...
And we wanted to give them the message that that's too much.
Yeah. That meant nothing to me.
Yeah.
It
starts the record. She sets up the picture of George lassoing the moon.
Yeah.
And
you can see her giving him latitude about kicking the gate. She's like, that's okay. It's going to be all right. We're still going to have a good time, even though you're mad about something.
And yet...
No, we're not.
It is completely overbearing.
As a man, it's like, I get it exactly. Yep. I would hate her in that moment, actually. And everything sweet that she did would just be another claw to my face. Like, stop it. Stop trying. I am not in the mood right now. Why don't you take a step back?
It's 4 years later, Mary.
Yeah. And if you're really interested in this, why don't you try playing hard to get once? Like, why don't you let me come after you? Like, stop it.
Stop conspiring with my mother to get me.
Right.
Like do not do that. Bad.
And you combine that with all the other rage and impotence he has about his whole life. And it's like,
yeah, I mean, he's just picked, Harry up from the train station earlier that day. And what kind of job is it? Is it a good job?
And then you have Mary's mother. Who's hilarious.
Yeah, she's great.
But you can feel the anger.
Yeah, she's so disappointed.
Oh, I was thinking of George's anger at her. Just like adding. This is ridiculous. Like,
no.
Well, and then she's mad at her mom. He's making violent love to me, mother.
Yeah.
She's just like,
that's a good
everybody's like, there's all kinds of tension going on here.
Oh, man.
Sam Wainwright's on the phone. Hello?
It's Mary.
Oh,
Sam is waiting.
It's awful.
And then we cut to Sam and we see who Sam really is.
Yep. That might be stacking the deck just a tad, but Yeah,
Sam comes through with like $20,000 or $25,000 or something ridiculous in the end.
In the end, he does. Yeah.
Well, and it's not stacking the deck because Sam he represents everything that George thought he wanted, and he has to through the whole movie. Just when George doesn't want to settle down with Mary, but would like to be living the high life with a bunch of showgirls around him.
Exactly.
That's exactly what Sam is doing.
Exactly right. And then when George and Mary are there, with the house for Nick Martini or whatever.
Yep. Sam and his current floozy come through.
They come through on the way to Florida.
Florida, yeah.
And hey, can't you just pick up and come with us right now?
What a jerk.
Hey, you should come. You should, hey, it'd be great. Let's go. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Our lives aren't like your life. Wouldn't it be great? I don't know.
And then George kicks the door of the car like he kicked the gate.
Exactly.
Oh man, this movie gets it.
and then he's going to get offered the job and he's going to turn it down and then he's going to find out that they're pregnant. And it's just like blow after blow after blow for poor George.
Poor George Bailey. Yeah. I like the tastefulness of the movie sort of cutting away before, as someone who just went through learning that his wife was pregnant and trying to have the right response, but also, and being genuinely excited about it, but also thinking about money and things like that.
Yeah.
I thought the movie was tasteful how we didn't get a big scene of George being really happy. It felt like we sort of drew a modesty panel over
George Bailey lassos stork.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cutscene.
Yeah. Well, that's really funny too. Mary at her most whimsical and punch drunk. It's ha ha ha. It's like, it's really great.
Yeah, no, Mary, she really emerges as a fully fleshed out character. I think just the way that Donna Reed plays her, and I don't know that we've said enough how perfect Donna Reed is for this
role.
She's just exactly like Jimmy Stewart. She's right at the right age where she can play a range of ages.
Yeah,
and I like that she's a little bit more. How does one say it? A little bit more womanly. A little bit. She actually feels mature for her age, even in the young scenes, as opposed to you'd
never today peg her as being in her 20s. Never.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not once she becomes George's wife. You could maybe. She does play the innocent high school girl just fine, but you would never peg her as being in her 20s by the time she gets all matronly and stuff like that.
Well, I think so many movies of the era would have cast for the high school girl,
and made her play up,
and made her play up. They actually cast, I think, for the wife and made her play down, and I think it's a really smart choice, especially since she generally is the mature one in any situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You cast a 20-year-old in that role who really does feel like she's stupid enough to just adore George Bailey unthinkingly. And the role doesn't work nearly as well. Like Mary, she knows what she's getting. She really likes George, and she locked into George
at a young age.
She's aware of his faults,
but she's not stupid or blind to who George is. She knows.
No, she's watched him.
She knows what she's getting, and
she knows his strengths and she knows his weaknesses.
Yeah,
she knows what she likes. She knows what she doesn't like, and she's got a plan for mitigating the things that she doesn't like. And you see it, you see it in action.
Yeah,
and even that is just another layer of development to the way the whole movie works. This isn't the first time that George has come home cranky from the office. Normally, it works just fine to take him into the kitchen. Tonight, that's not working.
Right. And that's how relationships work. I'm just imagining maybe some people are listening and they're like, yuck. So the movie's all about how women should enable men to be jerks. And you guys are okay with that? Hashtag toxic masculinity.
No,
we're not okay with that.
No, but what happened is, what you have to imagine happening is, hey, he's in a foul mood. Something bad has happened at work. He needs some space to go and decompress, and he'll come back apologetic and sorry about it, like he always does, or like he often does. But I'm just going to create the space. I'm going to get him out of the room. I'm going to minimize the damage now, and he'll come down. It'll be okay. We all have our moments, and we all know how to. You know when you need to remove yourself from a situation and go deal with yourself and deal with God. And they're not bringing God into the moment, but just the same, I don't want the kids. Let's just get into the kitchen, George. Let's just get into the kitchen, and Tommy, stop following us.
Right.
We need some space right now. I think that's just being a good wife.
Yeah.
And that's not enabling anything necessarily. Now, it can be enabling things if you're just always sort of like, if you're never dealing with anything. But you see Mary in the same scene. George has gone too far. Like, we're not mitigating this anymore. Like, George, you have to stop torturing the children. Like, so she's got lines.
Yeah.
And it's right and good and appropriate for her to have lines and to be able to say that to him. And to be able to say it to him in front of the kids at times. Like,
yeah, it all worked. I mean, if she was married to Nick the bartender and she was making space for Nick to be like Nick in Pottersville, it'd be one thing.
That would be one thing.
That would be one thing.
We, as movie watchers, are supposed to understand George is actually a pretty good guy. He does come home like this sometimes, but he apologizes. He works through it. They have a good marriage.
And you see it in the kids. Like, the kids don't expect, like...
They think that they have a right to their dad's attention and time and interest. And
that should be there because it's supposed to communicate something about how George normally is.
Well, even the way that they kind of shrug off his clearly irritated mood at first is a good sign. We know our dad and we're not worried about it. He's not nasty. Sometimes he's a little short with us.
Yeah, which we've seen through the whole movie. One of George's sins is he's short with people. So go stop annoying people. George has always been short with people. Hey! But you also, as you guys were saying, you get the impression George, he's the kind of guy that would listen to his daughter play the piano for a little bit, and then he'd probably be done with it. He's not today's lame dad. He's a dad of the era, but he wants to see the flowers. He gives Zuzu some time. Even in his darkest moment, he goes up and sees her and has a sweet little moment and takes her petals, I mean.
Yeah, and I really love those moments where it's like, he's not feeling sweet.
No.
But he's still going to go see his daughter. What he's not going to do is wait till he gets 100% right.
No.
And part of it, too, is like, it's complicated, but that complexity is great. Like, he's also just sort of retreating.
Yeah. He's retreating.
Right? He's withdrawing. He's retreating. He's just going to go see the sick little girl.
He's asking his daughter to comfort him a little bit.
Yep.
Well, but really, guys, we're back in the scene where the Buffalo Gal / infamous robe.
We jumped ahead.
Yeah, we keep jumping ahead. There's just so much to talk about. The other thing about their relationship is, I think a lot of portraits of wives and of these kinds of relationships are so idealized in movies of this era. Like, you have like the Gloria Graham, Violet type character in movies and film noirs. You have women that are sexual beings, and you have actresses that were famous for playing those kinds of roles. The most famous, of course, Marilyn Monroe in the 50s. Right. But when we see a woman who's supposed to
be that virtuous.
A lot of times it's played pretty, not sure what the best way to talk about it is. A lot of like, you think about Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca. She's a very spiritual creature. She's a very emotional creature. It's about her eyes. It's hard to imagine actually Humphrey Bogart being such an earthy guy, what exactly the two of them talked about all the time. And we're supposed to understand that they had a lot of fireworks in their relationship. They had good chemistry, but the movie wisely gives us the aftermath and doesn't give us too much of the text of that, because the math, yeah, because there actually wouldn't be a lot there. She's more ethereal.
Yeah.
Mary, as played by Donna Reed, very down to earth, there's a lot of sexual chemistry.
Really flirty whole scene between the two of them.
Yeah. And you understand that their desire for each other is not just some kind of pie in the sky idealized. No, these are two young people that really want each other in the normal sort of a way. And we really play with that tension with the robe scene.
I'm over here in the hydrangea bush. This is a very interesting situation. See, I could. I'll call the police. They'll be on my side.
They'd be on my side. They're across town. They'd be on my side.
Jimmy Stewart at his absolute most charming there. Not in Bedford Falls, anyway. This sort of thing doesn't happen every day. I mean, maybe that scene's even laying it a little bit too thick on with the...
It lays it on pretty thick.
With the sexual tension. I mean, as a kid, I always felt like, whoa, this sort of thing doesn't happen in my life every day either. But I kind of wish it would. I mean, it certainly taps into that. I think it's smart that the scene gets derailed. Like
Yeah.
there's no choice
You
that
can
George
only
can
do
make.
that scene if you're going to interrupt it with George's dad dying.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's smart.
Yeah.
Smart writing to completely take everybody out of that mood, that context.
Right.
And make them forget about it completely. And so if you know that Uncle Billy's going to show up and Dad's going to die, you can toy with that sexual tension.
Yeah. There's no way to write the ending to that scene. Like where does he give it to her? Does he not give it? Like there's no satisfying conclusion. Is a win for.
Well, and it doesn't end well. It doesn't end well for George. I mean, let's be honest. Like she's hiding in the bush.
Either
George can only play with that tension for so long before
It
she
becomes
gets
bad.
It goes bad
right
on him.
Yeah, there's any number of ways that they could write where it goes bad, but we don't want to see any of those.
Yep.
It could end in sin. It could end in awkwardness. It could end in George being lame. It could
end in her hating his guts and being totally disgusted and disillusioned by this pig of a man.
It's a charming little moment for as long as it lasts, and they make it last about as long as it possibly could. And then Dad dies, and I guess in terms of boring characters, the dad is about the least colorful character. Like if there was one part that you wouldn't be that interested in playing on the stage production,
Peter Bailey.
Peter Bailey, he's more of a symbol, and they don't flesh him out much.
Yeah,
but
you just want to feel like there's weight behind George, and there's something controlling his destiny other than stuff that he wants.
Yeah,
the dad does that, and you feel the dad's absence in the movie pretty effectively. Like now, George doesn't have any dad to go to. Like that's it. It's all on you, George.
It's all on you, George. The next scene is the board scene, the famous one of Jimmy Stewart's 12 big speech. You're just a warped, frustrated old man. That the first of many showdowns with Mr. Potter. The detail, the one thing that I really got to thinking about that I never really thought much about is the choice to put Potter in a wheelchair. And I think it's a really effective choice in terms of making him a repulsive villain. He is so one note, but if you can give him one thing that's kind of humanizes him / evokes a little bit of pity, it actually ramps up the disgust factor.
Yeah. Well, that's a really
pretty
great,
exponentially.
It's a really great moment from the first time we see Potter when it's Potter and Peter Bailey, and he tells his man to push him up.
Mm-hmm.
Push him forward. He can't lean forward as far as he wants. Push me forward.
Right.
Yeah. So that he can get in Peter's face. But yeah.
And I guess the story, is the implication supposed to be this guy got polio or something? Like he's just been taking revenge on the world for his whole life because I guess we just don't know. Potter's just the devil.
Yeah.
Basically. But
it's just a wrinkle.
It makes you ask that question. And I really think it does play with, if you can evoke just a little bit of pity for Mr. Potter, it makes you hate him a lot more. Like you really hate a rat, but a rat caught in a trap that's chewing at its own leg, you hate that thing a lot more precisely because it's weak. You kind of want to crush it. Mr. Potter.
Do you?
I don't know about that.
I think if you think about Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman as they're portrayed in the Universal monster movies, if you think about great monsters, there's often just a smidge of pity that you're supposed to evoke. Obviously, it's much more blatant with a character like Frankenstein's monster, who's designed to be actually mostly pitiful.
Yeah.
But even with somebody like Dracula, if you can, when the sun hits him, you want to feel like not 50% bad, not 40% bad, but you want to feel 2% bad for him. Like, oh, it would suck to never be able to go through a door with garlic.
It would suck. All right.
I am a card.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't know what went into their heads in terms of putting Potter in a wheelchair, but it's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
And then we have the return of Harry.
Another thing about that scene that is interesting, it's a choice that they seem to always want to make, which is to throw in a little nuance, throw in a little wrinkle, throw in a little truth with a lie. And so George doesn't have a problem with anything that Potter is saying at first.
Right.
It's just he crosses that line. George has to turn around and say, no, you're right when you said my dad was no businessman. I know that. Everybody knows that. But I don't know why I felt the need to point that out, except it's so easy to not write in those wrinkles and not write in those.
Yeah, if I'm writing this, it never occurs to me to have George acknowledge that Potter's right every turn.
Yeah.
But the fact that George basically always agrees with Mr. Potter's assessment of everything.
Yeah.
Like, this is a crummy town. These people are stupid. And my dad is
assessment's the same. It really does play like we're not so very different, you and I. You know, kind of thing. The assessment is almost always the same.
Right.
It's just the conclusion that you draw.
Yeah. George's conclusion is, we have to dig in and we have to help. And I'm saying the most obvious thing in the world. Potter's is different than that.
We get to exploit.
Yeah. It's like if the Emperor could win over Anakin, then man, what a henchman that would be. Right? That's the idea. That's kind of the dynamic.
It really is.
Yeah. If he could get, well, speaking of the Emperor took over the entire galaxy. And it is an interesting wrinkle to me that Potter, who is the devil, is content to simply prey upon Bedford Falls. I mean, he takes over the draft board. Like, Potter is capable of becoming the president of the world. He is capable of being Biff in Back to the Future Part 2. But it is something that's particularly evil about Mr. Potter. I think that he is in fact
fixated on Bedford Falls.
He's content with just destroying these little people. He doesn't actually want to shoot any.
He just kind of wants what's his. I guess maybe he grew up in Bedford Falls. Seems like he did. Like, he's just a fixture. It's not like he moved from out of town. No,
Mr. Potter is definitely an institution.
Yeah.
So okay, we go to the scene where Harry gets back. That train scene. I just want to reiterate, watch Jimmy Stewart's face, watch his acting. You'll really appreciate it.
Man, now I know where J.K. Rowling got it all from.
The train.
Potter, train, Harry.
Wow.
Potter,
whoa.
Train, Harry.
Dun, dun, dun.
Snape was kind of a warped, frustrated old man.
Man, this is amazing.
What was Harry but a warped, frustrated young man?
Yeah, exactly. Dumbledore always kept that giant picture of himself in his office.
Yeah.
That's not true. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. Train scene.
Yeah.
Good scene. I think Jimmy Stewart's finest acting in the whole thing, certainly his subtlest acting. Just watching him gather himself and make a choice to be happy for his brother instead of feeling all the anger and sadness that he wants to feel. It's not like a scene that really makes you cry or anything. It does if you're crying through the whole movie, which maybe all three of us were, but it's not in and of itself a big dramatic moment, but it's wonderfully observed.
Such a good moment
and acted. Yeah.
You know, the punch in the gut of meet the wife,
mm-hmm.
You know, then what are we doing? Congratulations. And then the moment between George and Harry.
The wife is perfectly pitched, by the way. She's not overbearing or obnoxious in a way that really punishes George for making the choice he does, but she's also not just like so wonderful that of course George has to make.
She just seems to be a good woman.
Yeah, she just seems normal and good.
Yeah.
It'd be easy to make a statement any number of directions.
Yeah, well,
with
but that was the great thing is like Harry is sort of apologetic and knows that he screwed his brother over and he's going to go get the luggage and then George is going to go feel her out,
mm-hmm.
like, you know, and feel out the job. And it's like, okay, like she's just happy. Seems like a sweet girl and it's a real good job and opportunity and she's just excited and she has no idea. She's an innocent. She doesn't deserve to be in George's crosshairs.
Nope. Yeah.
So.
It's good stuff. So the next section, which we've already touched on a lot of this, is the whole final culmination of Mary and George's courtship, as it were.
We've been around that one.
I think we've talked through most of what there is there. We've mined that deposit of gold. You get that weird scene where Violet hits on him and then suddenly they're surrounded by...
Yeah, that's a little contrived. Whatever.
Well, if I was going to write like my college thesis on this movie, it would be like about the power of the observer or something like that. Because George never has a dramatic moment in his life where he's not surrounded by Bedford Falls people. That movie, that's just the most contrived version of it. That's almost kind of the horror movie where pretty sure you could see Michael Myers sneaking up if it wasn't for the fact that the camera was in a close-up. Exactly. So we, the audience, couldn't see him sneaking up. That's kind of the same. Like, I'm pretty sure you'd notice that 15 people.
Just the two of you walking on the median, and then suddenly there's everybody.
Yep. I'm not sure what does that scene there to accomplish even? Like it just kind of keep Violet in the mix.
Well, it keeps Violet in the mix. It tells you that Violet doesn't understand George and that George is actually pretty frustrated.
I think it tells you more about George's state of mind. I mean, he is like, Mom's trying to point him to Mary Hatch, and he's about to go run off and skinny dip with Violet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he's just rebelling against everything that.
But he's also proposing it to her in such a way that will completely baffle him.
He despises her.
Yeah. It's not genuine.
Although you don't know. I think the movie is open. I think the movie intentionally makes it an open question. Would George have done it if
Violet had said,
yeah, of course.
Okay.
Well, the way that he sells it, I think he thinks it's super romantic.
But he's also angry.
I always feel like he's
angry.
playing her.
He's punishing Violet for being who she is. I mean, he definitely some disdain is coming through there, but it's the kind of disdain that you could almost see somebody like Violet responding positively to. So,
Okay.
I like when his mom, in a few minutes before that, says she's a girl who'll help you find the answers.
You find the answers.
Yeah,
you could see your mom telling you that, and you being like, "Oh my goodness!" Like, I don't want to hear that.
I don't want to hear that. But also, what a romantic line! Like, isn't that what we're all looking for?
Yeah, it's true.
One of the more
and his mom's right.
Idealized statements in the movie, perhaps, but I'm here for it. Then I guess we've talked through the whole phone scene, and I do love any moment we can break away from George Bailey and get somebody's perspective, and it's a well earned and well timed moment to just get Mary's perspective as she smashes that record as she's.
Mm-hmm.
It's what saves Mary from the character of Mary from being more maudlin than she is. Like, this is an angry woman who knew what she wanted, is not happy that she's not
just as frustrated as George, and she's not in a position. She can't just go get George.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
she can't. George has to come.
And her taking it out on her oppressive mother as the situation goes south with he's making violent love to me, mother, or whatever it is. Pretty great. They color in that relationship really nicely in the space of 60 seconds or something like that.
Yeah.
And then isn't the mother crying at the wedding in a way that does not look like tears of joy?
Not happy.
No.
She really wanted that Wainwright.
Yeah.
She wanted a Wainwright in the family.
Which you could forgive her for?
No, it is a little weird because Sam Wainwright's going to take her away from Bedford Falls, and she seems very much the widow. So, but maybe she would just plan or hope to be able to go with her. So,
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it works if you don't examine it. If you don't interrogate the text too much, it just works as the oppressive mother figure who's standing between the heroine and what she wants for the space of the scene. So, wedding. Bank run, famous bank run scene. It's a wonderful showcase for Jimmy Stewart to talk about how much Jimmy Stewart actually plays against his aw shucks persona in this movie and in most of his great roles. But that's a good scene for Jimmy Stewart to just do his Jimmy Stewart thing, hop over the counter.
Yep. And, mediate that tension and also explain to people in the audience how banks work and buildings and loans work. I don't know. I always found that just sort of interesting as a kid.
Yeah.
Like that whole concept of like, wow, they don't have all the money in a vault.
Yeah.
It was like, I thought that was interesting as a kid.
For such a fable-like story, it's the same thing with Casablanca, and there's all the business about the letters of transfer and everything. These stories are so simple and so elemental, and yet they have these details that, especially watching it as a kid, you're like, I don't understand that at all. And it seems this is so completely of the world of adults, and it adds a little bit of a mystique and interest to it that it wouldn't otherwise have. And kids can enjoy these. Kids don't have to understand. You can make emotional sense of something like that without making literal sense of it. You don't really need to know exactly what's at stake to know Mr. Potter's bad and he's got George on the ropes and Uncle Billy did something dumb. That's all you really need to understand. But the other stuff does work as just window dressing and color. I guess that's the word of this podcast.
Well, Uncle Billy didn't necessarily do anything dumb by closing the doors. What else was he going to do?
Yeah. I guess I was fast forwarding again to Uncle Billy doing the dumbest thing that.
But putting $8,000 into Potter's lap.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is true that Uncle Billy does not know. He's not going to stand up to people and help them deal with the tension of here's what's happening and don't worry. Here's the path forward.
Yeah,
he has no ability.
George is going to open the door and say, "Hey, wait!" He's going to try to make everybody act like
sit
people.
down. There's a lot of chairs.
Yeah. We're all people here. I'm not closing the.
What that scene does is that very few movie scenes I think do is I actually buy that Jimmy Stewart could pull it off in that situation. Like so often it seems arbitrary to me when I'm watching a movie. Like it's another thing we can make fun of Aaron Sorkin for. The good guy, President Bartlett's on the ropes and everybody thinks his talking points are stupid until such point as Aaron Sorkin gives him a good speech and then suddenly everybody thinks it's great. Like it's the kind of thing that happens on every episode of The West Wing.
Yeah.
And you don't really feel like, okay, yeah, we know it's a pretty speech. We know it's well written, but why would people actually be convinced by it? But Jimmy Stewart in that moment with the deck stacked the way it is and with his brand of charisma and with the things that he's given to say, it feels like maybe Heaven Smiles, you could pull it off. Maybe Jake could pull that off, if that was what he had to argue. Like you could it actually feels like it kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the movie.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he had the facts on his side.
Yeah.
And he had the people on his. He knew all the people, and it was a small enough crowd, and he had the facts. Like the bank is secured. They're going to open their doors in a week. All our money will be backed and protected. We just need to all figure out how we can last the week together. We got $2,000 to go around between us. We don't have to go and take a 50% loss on our shares.
Right.
Don't be stupid.
Right.
Don't panic. Right. You can see a handful of people running over anyway, like they did. You can see some people saying, well, I just want everything I got because I don't trust you or anything. And you can see some people saying, okay, you were there for me before. I'll trust you on this and we'll try to figure this out together. Like, and if he's got that kind of relationship with them and it's been personal face to face the whole time, then he can pull it off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it does come back, some of it, to Jimmy Stewart's actual star quality. Like you believe that this man,
he's really got the charisma.
He could really, pull it off. It's like what Joe Biden was always pretending to be in the debates. He wanted to be like there's a man in Pennsylvania sitting by his stove who it's easy to make fun of how bad Biden was at that sort of personal touch, but Jimmy Stewart, he's got it. He could have been a politician.
Yeah, he's got it. I had forgotten that the crusty old guy who demands all of his money.
The 47.
This closes my account. No, it doesn't. This is just a loan.
Yeah.
$262 or something.
Yeah.
And but
your account's still here.
Your account's still here, right? But then he comes back at the end. He's smiling a lot. I just thought, well, that's sweet. The guy probably loves him for giving him the money and helping him not to be an idiot and
disciplining him a little bit.
You mean he comes back at the end of the movie?
Yeah, he comes back at the ending at the party and drops off some money and
yeah. Well, everything about the play that George makes is really smart. The more you think about it, even the fact that like he could have drawn a line and said, "No, you agreed. We got it in writing. We got a contract. You agreed to 60-day turnaround. 60 days is a long time. You'll get your money in 60 days. Period. That's it. That's what you guys agreed to. It's on paper. Chill out." And none of them understand that it was his honeymoon money.
Right.
But George was buying a whole lot of goodwill with that honeymoon money.
Yeah. Amazing
in that moment.
Amount of goodwill.
Yeah.
I do love it when a movie can, in a non-cheesy way, assert, and don't hear this in an anti-Calvinist way, folks, but assert the goodness of humanity, assert that every once in a while, a group of people, not just a lone George Bailey, but a group of people can actually be convinced to make the right choice. It's the La Marseille scene in Casablanca. If you can convincingly stack the deck such that we get to the point where a group of people band together and just say, yeah, we're going to do the right thing. It's always very moving. All right, we got the wonderful Mr. Martini section. The goat rides in the back of the car.
Yeah.
And then we got, I guess we've already kind of talked about this, but the Mr. Potter tries to get George to sell his soul. Then we've got that wonderful montage with all the stock
War
footage.
stuff, yeah.
They superimpose.
Our characters on.
Right. They have a silly moment with him whistling.
Who whistles?
George. He's the air warden.
Oh, yeah. That whole thing.
This is just silly.
Well, and I'm sorry.
He whistles and then he spits on himself.
Yeah.
And when the narrator's like, of course, in between raising 12 kids and redecorating the house, Mary found time to lead the... They're landing on maybe a tad thick there, but you gotta love it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is important to remember this movie came out in 1946. I think that informs the optimism and the pessimism of this movie. You know, I mean, people had been through a brutal war. It starts to make sense of some of the darkness of this movie, which this movie is essentially a very dark movie through a lot of it. I mean,
I think it's because of that. Like in that montage, when you start to come to the end of it, and it's like so and so they did like so and so like on VE Day they wept and prayed, and on VJ Day they wept and prayed again. You know. But those little moments don't feel cheap. They actually hit.
Yeah,
or they do for me. They do a good enough job of putting you in that feeling of the craziness of being in a world war, the craziness and the what's going to happen of it all.
Well, and it's not Michael Bay and Pearl Harbor trying to play your emotions. It's Capra, who made propaganda movies, whose career actually never really recovered. All of his popular movies are pre-World War II, you know, Mr. Deeds and Mr. Smith and It Happened One Night and Lost Horizon and all that stuff. And then he gives himself to the war effort and he never really gets his mojo back. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life is his big movie after World War II, and it doesn't connect with people and it doesn't make money. And then you got Jimmy Stewart, who had his pilot license and went and flew missions. I mean, these guys had skin in the game, I guess is my only point. Like, they cared about the war effort.
Yeah.
They cried and they prayed. So they're not being, it can feel corny to cynical people 60 years down the line or whatever it is. I guess 80 years down the line now. But these guys believed it. Yeah. They weren't just like patting their audience on the back cynically. They were saying, we all actually had to do this, and it's nice to sort of commemorate it in a movie, and it's moving. Right. And now we're to kind of, I don't know if you'd call this the middle act or I don't know where we are on like the high school arcing out the story kind of thing, but Uncle Billy's going to go to the bank. He's going to lose that money.
Harry just got home, or is coming home and having a party.
Yep.
Can't keep those Potter boys down, can you? Or can't keep those Bailey.
Every heel was in Germany and Japan, Mr. Potter.
Yeah, can't keep those Bailey boys down.
Can't keep the Bailey boys down.
By the way, there's some really weird jump cuts in there.
Yes, I remember that.
Where Billy's mocking Mr. Potter, and it just cuts. And the reason for that, if anybody's curious, it's not bad filmmaking. It's that part of the film deteriorated, and the way that the archivists back then would save the film is they would just simply as in some places they would just like remove the whole scene, sort of try to make it work artistically. But what they decided at a certain point is we want to preserve as much of the movie as possible. So we're going to literally just take scissors and cut out the degraded. It's like removing the moldy part of a fruit that you're going to eat or something like that. So you'll see a couple, you watch a movie.
I noticed that.
You watch a movie from this era, you'll see jump cuts sometimes. You know, I mean, it's sad because nobody was thinking we need to preserve this for posterity, and film stock of the era was really easily degraded and didn't work that well. So, you know, there's lots of movies that are just lost to us at this point. And like Lost Horizon, a big Capra hit from the era, isn't really well known today because a good chunk of it's just lost. Like, it just degraded. So, and then we're off to the races. We got our final scene with Violet going off. And then Uncle Billy comes in. He's a silly, stupid old fool.
Sure is.
It has never occurred to me to question how fast George Bailey falls. If in watching it this time, I did not question it. I once again did not question that. But I did think about why I'm not questioning that. I mean, we are watching a guy who's pretty decent through the whole movie. He's got his problems, but we're going to have to ask the audience to believe that he's gone from pretty decent, making do, a little bit of bitterness, whatever, to suicide. That's a tall act. Like if you just told me that's your story outline and now I have to write that, that's some work to make that play.
But the reason it works, and we talked about this a little bit before, or the reason I think it works, I mean, certainly it works because very few people actually question it.
Yeah, we wouldn't be talking about the movie if that didn't just land completely.
Yeah, it's like at every turn, what we've seen of George is up against the wall and it's him or somebody else, and George always picks somebody else.
Right.
He always makes the sacrificial play. George is backed into a corner that he doesn't seem to clearly have any way out of. It's prison that night. It's prison for him or for Uncle Billy. He's ready to explode on Uncle Billy the way that he exploded on Mary earlier and is going to explode on Mary and the kids later. I want to do what I want to do. One of us is going to prison and it's not going to be me. And he's saying that all the while knowing that he's going to be the one to take that. He's going to be the one to take that bullet, even if it, in this case, is wrong of him to do it. That's what he thinks he's going to do or what he thinks he should do. So then, he's going to run the options he can think of, which is Potter. He's got the life insurance policy. It's like, well, if I'm going to make the sacrificial play and the two plays are prison or death, I guess death is probably the better one.
Right.
For everybody, because at least everybody gets off the hook. And you can imagine somebody that has carried as much frustration and sense of complete failure and impotence as George Bailey actually having a pretty short push when it comes to it, when he suddenly feels like he's got no options. And he's as self-deprecating as George has been for the entire movie. Like, part of why George makes the sacrificial play is because he thinks Harry's better than him.
Right.
It's a twisted altruism. It's not just like a noble love. And so if he can just throw away himself and spend his whole life throwing away himself and his dreams on the altar of the good of other people, then...
Yeah, I mean, it is...
Yeah.
I think it probably is slightly somewhat narrative sleight of hand that gets us over that hump, because it is a big ask. Like, it's pretty dark. I mean, it's a heck of an unforgivable thing to do to Mary, just for starters.
Yeah.
Just where it's placed in the story, a lot of things structurally conspire to make it feel okay, or make it feel like it's just a story point, where if you actually had to slow down and think about it, or if it was placed a little differently, or if it was just handled a little less delicately, you might be like, really? That's awful.
He's also drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's drunk. I mean, I don't know. The whole movie is playing with the this is mostly what Jake was saying, I guess, but like, he has a thing he wants that he never gets. He never processes it. He never finishes processing it. He never comes to a point of resolution or a point of rest. And he won't until the end of the movie. So it just builds, and you watch all the moment where it builds, and then he suppresses it, and it builds again, and you suppress it until finally it can't be. Yeah,
well, it's like you said, Ben. Every scene tells the story of George Bailey and Vinegar, and that's the story.
That's the story.
That's a large part of what makes this work.
You don't really know that George would actually go through with it. He's out there on the bridge, and Clarence preempts it, and Clarence is a doofus.
Right.
And that's abundantly clear from the beginning. Like, so just because Clarence thinks that George is actually going to go through with it doesn't mean George is actually going to go through with it. I mean, we do get the little wild-eyed look from Jimmy Stewart,
and we do get, when they're talking up in heaven, they talk about how George is in danger, at least. Maybe it's not. Totally faded.
No, he does say he's seriously contemplating throwing away God's greatest gift.
His life. Well, then I have to hurry.
Right. No, it says.
Yeah.
I submit that the point I just tried to make was bad. The movie actually thinks that George is going to go through with it. That he is going to go through with it.
I think actually you're both right. I think the movie tells us at the very top that George will go through with it to create suspense. Then I think the way that they stack the story, the way that they tell that story in the moment, actually gives George more plausible deniability and more escape, and it makes it more palatable. in other words, there's a difference between what Clarence is told in heaven and what we actually see. What we actually see is much more forgivable and understandable than just the blanket statement that sets up the problem at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a drunken guy who's always made the right decision before. I actually think if we didn't have the conversation in heaven and you just played the movie through for me and I didn't know there was an angel coming, I would assume that George is
not gonna
do it. I would assume.
I think you're right.
That's right.
This is just
George is gonna find some way, or what actually happens is if you take the angel conceit out of it, what happens is Uncle Billy sits down with George, or somebody sits down with George and says, George, Harry shows up and says, George, you've taken the hits for everybody, and this is not a hit that you can take or should take.
Right.
It's wrong of you to take this hit. It's not your hit to take. And maybe we get a little Deus Ex Machina still, but the lesson George learns is, hey, George, you don't have to take all the hits for everybody. You don't exist to be the sacrificial lamb of Bedford Falls. There's something closer along those lines that ends up a different kind of epiphany happens for George.
Yeah.
If you take a Clarence out of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, obviously you'd lose your third act, but you could do a movie where the townsfolk just show up and say, hey, man, we got some money for you. We like you. But instead we're going to have good old Clarence show up. I think I'm always surprised watching this movie by an adult how little of Clarence there is and how, I mean, he's a good character, but there's just not, you think of him as so much bigger.
As a kid, because as a kid, that's what you're waiting for.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of tension and a whole bunch of drama that as a kid, you're just waiting to see the Clarence part because Clarence is an angel and that's kind of cool or weird and mystical and funny. And as a kid, at least for me, that felt like the good stuff.
Right. But I think even if it's only subconscious, we have put up with George whining for so much of the movie that there's a little bit of, we feel good watching that get punctured a little bit. And especially when it's done by someone as completely disarming and harmless as Clarence
Oddbody.
Yeah. and it never quite rises to like the conscious thought that we might have about, yeah, good, tell Scrooge he's a miser. We don't actually think that about George, but I think on some level we are happy to, come on, George. Like it's nice to see Clarence put a pin in that.
It's and why they throw Clarence at George is hilarious.
Why they throw
it? Like, there's a man constantly thinking about committing suicide. Let's throw this moron at him and see what happens.
That's heavenly wisdom.
Yes. They understand more than we do, I guess.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Ben?
Well, it's just, I don't know. From the Clarence moment onward, maybe even more than George going off on the kids and Mary and George at the bar, getting punched by Mr. Welsh. George becomes really not likable. Like, he's not drunk anymore, apparently, because all of his physical stuff has never happened, because he doesn't exist. But he's in this weird mental fog, like he had a mental break.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of like, dude, like, stop it.
Yep.
You're just being petty and dumb. And
well, I think people that accuse this movie of corny must forget about all that. And it's not just because the scenes in and of themselves are dark, but it is because George takes so long to believe in Clarence. And when he's first told about the famous corny angel gets their wing thing, he sneers at it. The movie is actually doing a lot of work to say, okay, here's your reaction. Here's how a human feels about this dumb angel gets his wing thing.
All right, you two pixies. You two pixies go
Out
through the door, out
go.
the window. It's like, at the point where Clarence is like, I'm 400 years old or something like that.
Right. Then we're going to see Mr. Gower, the bum, get seltzer water sprayed in his face as the bar laughingly. Oh, man. It's so dark.
Yeah. It's awful.
Get me. I'm giving out wings.
That's pretty great. That actor is a lot of fun.
We serve hot drinks for men who want to get drunk fast.
Don't need any characters.
For atmosphere.
Yeah, right. Give the joint atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what that guy would say. Oh, man.
Oh, boy.
I love the conceit that it really is a there but for the grace of God. Like in the George Bailey Lives universe, Nick's okay. He's just kind of in his place.
Yeah.
In the George Bailey Dies universe, Nick is the monstrous proprietor of
this horrible bar.
This horrible bar.
Everyone is on the bitter side of things. Everyone is bitter, actually.
Yeah.
I guess bitterness is the defining quality of the alternate universe, huh?
Yeah, Ernie and Bert and...
Well,
Bert is still the most decent, like...
Yeah, but it's precisely because Bert always had a little bit of an edge. Like, Ernie and Bert don't change that much, I think, because, you know, they don't... They're nice guys, you know, they sing for George's honeymoon or whatever, that weird scine.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I love the little bit of business where he kisses him on the forehead and then he
hits the hat. That's great.
By the way,
part of the whole conceit of the movie is that Potter, all of these people that we're interacting with, there's a whole other class of people that we're not interacting with. They're the kind of people that bank at the bank. The kind of people who bank at the bank can bank at the bank.
Right.
Kind of people who can't, who get turned down by the bank, end up at the building and loan. And so you have this sort of lower class rabble of garlic eaters, as Mr. Potter puts it, that he's trying to keep under his thumb, that he's trying to oppress and keep in his slums. And so George really does have, you know, a direct impact on all these people simply by giving them a chance, by giving them hope, by giving them opportunity to better themselves and to better their lives and to start a family. Martini's not able to run the bar because Martini never got the chance. And so it's Nick's place instead of Martini's place. And, you know, all these things, they do cascade, but it does have its own logic in the movie itself.
Yeah. Ernie's wife left him.
Yeah. Because they were stuck in a slum in Potter. Like, they actually make that point. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It's just they never could get out of the pressure that they were under in the slums and breathe, get some self-dignity and some self-worth. So, of course, they're just bitter, oppressed people. That bitterness with this very particular subset of Bedford Falls actually makes a whole lot of sense.
It does. It is what makes this feel organic for the most part, the alternate universe. It's also an argument that, I don't know, I remember reading this article years ago by a guy talking about how It's a Wonderful Life could be taken as an apologetic for capitalism. Because you have Mr. Potter, who's nasty and who's a kind of capitalist, but then you have Jimmy Stewart's character doing it right. You know, he's part of the free market competition with Mr. Potter, and he's actually giving economic opportunity, and he's building the town financially, right? Which is, I don't know, it does feed into the world of Bedford Falls, that these people have a financial opportunity they wouldn't have otherwise, and it keeps it a nicer town.
Yeah.
A better place, a higher standard of living.
Yeah.
And that's actually true. I mean, maybe Capra wanted to be anti-capitalist, but I don't, even if you don't buy that this isn't
there's a smarter kind of capitalism than just take everything you can get in the moment.
Well,
a smarter kind of capitalism plays long games.
The leftists of today always want to own the leftists of that era, and I never know how much to allow it. Like, would Capra, if you just launched him, and Jimmy Stewart, who, by the way, was basically conservative, I think, Republican.
So was Donna Reed, for the most part.
Like, if you took someone like Capra, a famous leftist of his day, and brought him in a time machine, would he be happy with things like universal health care, with Joe Biden forgiving school debt? I mean, you'll see things on Twitter where people will be like, well, of course George Bailey would vote for Joe Biden, you know, but I'm not sure I actually buy that these people were quite as radically progressive as the radical left would now like to own a lot of these people.
Yeah.
I think Capra is probably problematic enough that nobody really tries to own him that much. But on its surface, if you didn't know anything about Capra and you just saw this movie, I think that it's like Mr. Deeds, some of those other movies are more purely anti-capitalism. And this one really does almost seem like it's just in favor of gentle capitalism or good capitalism or
enlightened
capitalism. Like, I always forget how much this final section actually lives. There's all like the moral quandaries of this is the kind of thing that would have happened if George, you know, here's how this person is, but then we just live for a long time with the nightmare aspect of George Bailey being stuck in this world where nobody recognizes him. That scene where he goes into his old house
Yeah.
And it's all broken down and none of his family's there. And
It's
he's running from
creepy.
room. And then the cops show up, the door opens, they're backlit. You can't see any of their faces.
Yep.
That's really creepy. And then George, I think that's the moment where George runs out and stumbles into a close up. So it's just like on this really expressionist close shot of Jimmy Stewart's grizzled, wide-eyed face. Like that whole section, you could think of nightmares that you've had that did that kind of work. Like it's really creepy. Maybe it's undercut a little bit by the cops goofing around as Clarence disappears on them, but it's pretty scary stuff. Yeah, his mother is terrible, which makes sense. I guess we should talk a minute about, does Mary become an old maid? And do you guys buy that?
I remember this now.
We had this discussion
in our earlier discussion.
But
it serves the story well.
I think my theory on it is that Clarence stacked the deck a little bit, I think.
There you go.
I don't think Clarence was playing quite fair, because there's no way that Mary...
Gotta show George a version of Mary that would horrify him. Right.
So he went to the alternate dimension where Mary had developed a disease and been given shock treatment or something like that and became this librarian. But if he had just taken George to the straight alternate dimension with no George Bailey, Mary Hatch would have been happily married to Sam Wainwright, or
maybe not living in Bedford Falls.
Yeah, I don't know what Mary Hatch would have done, but Mary Hatch is vibrant, alive, a go-getter.
Yep.
She's
quite pretty.
Yeah, she ain't having any problem choosing somebody else if like the movie actually doesn't do any work to set.
There's no reason to think that Mary it just never gives you anything.
I mean, you could do the whole I'm glad they didn't do this, but you could actually set up the whole relationship so she's like a shy, quiet, retiring girl. George draws her out of her shell. Yep. Blah 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 blah, and then you fast forward and she never would have been drawn out of her shell. But that's not how they do it.
Well, but Donna Reed does such a good job of making herself like a not that attractive spinster.
Yeah, it's
just in her affect.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah.
She disappears into a different character.
It's a great moment. And I wouldn't mind watching Donna Reed just play that character in a movie. I'm sure she'd do a good job. I think it's really silly when Bert the cop discharges his gun in a crowd of people.
That's what my wife was laughing at the other night.
Yeah, it's so stupid. And then they take out a letter in Pottersville or whatever. He busts out a letter in Pottersville.
Oh, does he? Does it change it? And is it saying something or?
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
No, one of his shots takes out a letter.
That's funny.
Pottersville's lit up behind George.
Watch out!
Lays it on a little thick. Violet's being picked up by the police for we dare not speculate what. And yeah, oh well. It's kind of silly. They had us with that house scene. They didn't need to go for it. They didn't need to have.
Although when George walks down, you've had all these shots of Bedford Falls, where it follows him along the streets, and then when it follows him along Pottersville, and it's just like hell.
Yeah.
It's pretty effective.
It is pretty effective.
All pawn shops and strip joints.
Pawn shops, strip joints. Yeah. Girls.
It's like really gross. It's like, this is awful. Yeah. I've been in towns like this too.
Yeah, no, they do a good job. I mean, it's definitely a recognizable place. I mean, sad to say, but Pottersville is a place that I think I've been to more in my life than Bedford Falls.
Yeah.
And then you have the ending of the movie.
Old Lang Syne's a cheap trick in a movie that doesn't have a lot of cheap tricks, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
I told Jake in the car that to me, I'd never heard Auld Lang Syne anywhere else. So the only association for the song was It's a Wonderful Life. So to me, it never played like a cheap trick, but I get it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I would have had that thought, except there's a really great song that's usually used sort of in a year called, I think, All Glory Be to Christ or something like that. That's set to Auld Lang Syne. Mm-hmm. And it's really great. But it uses the melody of Auld Lang Syne. Today we listened to some friends do a version of Psalm 90 to Auld Lang Syne, which was also really great.
Right.
I was telling Ben that it's such a cheap trick to do anything with that melody because it's such a wonderful, iconic, heart wrenching melody.
Maybe all songs should be Auld Lang Syne from now on.
I just connected it to the end of that movie as just being like the iron thread that you sew it on with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can see that argument, and I think it makes sense. I think maybe, Jake, you come from the most mainstream. Well, your parents were divorced pretty young. I'm just speculating here. I don't know. I'm sort of with Ben in that when people sing, I didn't really grow up with Auld Lang Syne, and when people sing it at parties and stuff,
you think
my reference point is It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
It's a Wonderful Life was the thing that made it, that created that association for me.
Well, I don't know that that's not true for me either, except that I feel like, and I can't quite articulate this, and I couldn't quite articulate figure out how to articulate it in the car with Ben on the way up here, but there's something about that melody and those types of Irish, Scottish folk melodies, certain of them that just
bypass all defenses.
Yeah, they just go deep.
Mm.
Yeah, you don't have defenses against it. It's like there's either so much cultural cachet or some kind of like collective memory, or they've endured because they just so perfectly, in a musical sense, they just so perfectly get through all that stuff. Like, and that's why they've been around for hundreds of years. There's something to it that I don't know how to put my finger on.
No, I mean,
but it is what draws me to those types of folk melodies, and it's what I always am like in everything I've ever done for My Soul Among Lions. It's what I'm always striving for poetically, is something that can live with a melody like that.
Mm-hmm.
That can be like, that can evoke that kind of just, I don't know how to put my finger on it. It's sober and sad and poignant and hopeful. I think Auld Lang Syne is just
too much.
Puts the hat on the hat, as you like to say. But
oh man, I do like to say that, don't I?
You say that a lot.
Like Clarence, you showed me my way. Yeah, no, it does. I don't know. I mean, Bedford Falls and all of our heroes, it is kind of like working class, Irish, sort of an Italian feeling town.
Yeah.
But basically Irish Catholic outside of the Martinis and people like that.
Yep.
I can't think of what other song these people would all sing.
Oh no, I'm not sure that I fault it. I just think that's a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what else you do. It's like when people complain about.
So I was like getting all teary listening to my friends sing Psalm 90, and I couldn't separate. Could they have just been singing Auld Lang Syne? I don't know, but this is really landing for me. Like every word of this psalm, how much of it is. And it was good. Like the poetry was good. Everything about it was, and Psalm 90 is Psalm 90. And so it all just came together in a pretty strong way.
It's one of those melodies like, was it Michelangelo, one of those guys who said, it's easy for me to make a statue. I just get a rock and I chip away everything that's not the statue.
That's right. It's Michelangelo, I think.
Auld Lang Syne feels like that. It feels like one of those Platonic ideals of a song.
Yeah.
God just planted in the universe, and all we had to do was find it. Some melodies are made, some melodies are there to discover, and Auld Lang Syne is one of those. And so, I mean, it's like Beethoven's Ninth or other things you could name, but yeah, it does have that kind of power. But yeah, you can't do anything else because it is what this community of people would sing, and it does put you in the mindset of a small town where people might actually get together and sing together. And that's one of the songs that they would sing. So is there anything else to say about the ending of this movie? I mean, there's not really a lot to digest in it. It really is just all the threads coming together in a beautiful way.
Yep. It really is. I mean, it really is one of the best movies of all time. Yeah. Or at least one of my favorites.
I think it's one of the best movies of all time. I would go that far. I mean, it's not an example of innovative movie making or someone furthering the art in a way that something like Citizen Kane or even something as simple as Casablanca is. It's really just a good story well told. But
so many things align within the movie.
Yeah,
to make
you can't tell this same story without these stars, without these people, without this era.
Yeah.
without this director. I mean, and all you have to do is go watch Mr. Deeds or Mr. Smith or one of those, and you'll see they're good. Some of them might be great, but they're not this. This really was, Capra stumbled into something. Stewart, they accidentally did something really great. It is just one of those things that God smiled on, really. I mean, if that's not an inappropriate way to talk about it. You could not intentionally make this movie. You could not set out to make this movie. You could set out to make a pretty good movie that's like it, but the stars really have to align for this movie to work the way that it does and to work as well as it does. I mean, it wasn't even intended as a Christmas movie. Capra always said later in life, I'm shocked. He was happy, but he was shocked that it became a Christmas movie. He always compared it to a kid growing up and having a life of his own and surprising you with a good thing. And like, my child went off, he disappeared for 30 years or whatever it is, and now he's back in a completely different capacity, and it's one of the happy surprises of my life that this thing that I gave birth to is now somehow, for some weird reason, embraced as a Christmas classic. I just thought it was about a working man making good, or everybody has friends or something like that. I didn't know it was a Christmas movie. And of course, he's an idiot because it's the best Christmas movie. And Jimmy Stewart and all those people, most of them did live to see it become, so it is one of those happy things where we didn't have to wait until everybody was dead for an audience to discover it. Jimmy Stewart and Frank Capra both lived to see this movie have a second life. Decision not to punish Mr. Potter is always an interesting one to me. And I think it's the right choice. I think if you're going to circle back for any kind of revenge or vendetta or now you get yours kind of thing, it just
it is its own revenge for Mr. Potter. He's now George Bailey's now the wealthiest man, and that's not just it's figurative, but there's a literal
made Mr. Potter impotent, right?
Yeah. George Bailey is now fortified. Mm-hmm. Like, he has tens of thousands of dollars. Like, and there's nothing that Potter can do to him now. There's nothing that Potter can do to him. And George now knows that for the first time. Mm-hmm. I mean, Potter is the author of his own demise as far as that's concerned. Potter doesn't take that 8,000, then he still always has a chance, and at least has a psychological edge on George. Mm-hmm. But now it's over because George is healed.
Yep.
And redeemed and has tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. And it seems like it just occurred to me, he doesn't even hate Mr. Potter anymore. Like, he's actually over it.
Yeah.
He's like, Merry Christmas, Mr. Potter.
Yeah, I know.
It's okay. I know you're a horrible person and you hate me, but it's okay.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas anyway.
Yeah. No, that is a wonderful moment. Just we're zen about this now. It's okay.
I'm going to jail. Isn't that wonderful?
Mr. Potter is going to be Mr. Potter. There's always going to be Mr. Potters in the world. What are you going to do?
Potter's going to pot.
Potter's going to Potter. I mean, I think the reason I keep comparing it to Casablanca and Citizen Kane is not just because both those movies are black and white classics of the era, but they all do have that kind of elemental pull that continues across the ages. It's just like, these are timeless stories that we can find ourselves in again and again and again.
Yep.
Well, I think we've said enough about this movie. We've gone for almost 3 hours here, guys.
Cool.
I think that's going to be enough Sanity at the Movies for 2020, but we'll be back in 2021. Hopefully Ben will have an opportunity to join us more.
I'd like that.
I would like that too. And let's not forget to call out our patrons in the Patron Choice Award of Awesomeness. Since it's the end of the year and we just did a 3-hour episode, let's just talk about how awesome all 5 of these people are.
All right.
Jacqueline, you're awesome.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
You're a regular Mary Hatch.
Wow.
Jeffrey, you're awesome.
You're a regular George Bailey?
And Mary's really the only one that comes out of this thing with her hands completely clean.
Yeah, sorry. That's the best we can do.
George Bailey's as good as they come. So you're George. Hey, you could do worse than...
You'd be Peter Bailey.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, you're regular Peter Bailey.
You could be Harry Bailey.
You could be the younger Peter Bailey.
Yeah.
The oldest son.
Yep.
What about Jay? What's Jay? Who's Jay? Clarence. I guess Clarence is pretty good. He's kind of a doofus, though.
Wow.
Mr. Martini,
Yeah, he could be Mr. Martini.
Yeah, Mr. Martini.
Family Man.
Mr. Gower. No.
No.
No, not quite.
There was that time where Jay almost poisoned all those people. And then when a child tried to stop him, and he started beating the child until his ear bled. That was a sad day, but he's a great guy. Seth, what about Seth?
Oh man, Seth could be
Tommy.
I'm losing characters.
Who's Tommy again?
The other boy.
Oh, in the drugstore at the beginning?
No, the youngest, Bailey.
Oh, right.
Excuse me.
Oh,
I burped. Ryan and Judith. Who are they? Who are
Mr. and Mrs. Welsh.
Yeah, there we go.
okay.
They're pretty good people.
Yeah,
They just don't get
a starring role.
they don't get a sympathetic portrayal because they're opposite George. But
that's right.
There's nothing wrong with Mrs. Welsh, and there's nothing wrong with Mr. Welsh defending his wife's honor.
Not at all.
I have always felt like the movie missed a bet by not having Mr. Welsh show up at the end and say, George, I heard about your thing, and obviously, even though we had I don't know.
Yeah, hard day.
Do something.
They should have resolved that storyline, actually. It's not okay that George was horrible to those people.
No, it's not okay.
And I don't know. Maybe there just needs to be a little Marvel like post credits thing where Mr. Martini's like, "Welcome back to my bar, Mr. Welsh."
I'm a Mario. I'm gonna win.
I'm sorry that it's George versus you. I'll select your drink. I don't know. Good times.
Good times.
Yep. What would be the credits? Would that be the credits cookie on this? I guess the credits cookie.
The credits cookie is the stupid SNL skit
where they all
like that.
beat the crap out of Mr. Potter.
Wait, I remember what happened to that $8,000.
Well, by the way, I'm not the first person to point it out, but and there's no reason that the movie should resolve this. It's fine the way. I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. But if you want to be grumpy, you can point out that just because the townsfolk come and give George some money doesn't mean that he's out of legal trouble for that money that went missing. The movie rightfully waves its magic wand and makes that problem go away. But actually, if you're the police officer or the bank guy or anything, you're like,
misappropriation of funds is serious, and you can't just come up with it and call it good.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like Mr. Potter, you have to imagine, and It's a Wonderful Life 2.
He is not letting it go.
Begins with George in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. Potter there in his wheelchair. Well, how does it feel to be the wealthiest man in prison, George?
That's awesome.
That would be a good hook for It's a Wonderful Life 2. It's a Wonderful Lifer.
Could be. I want to see a story told from the perspective of Mr. Potter's silent henchman.
Oh, I love that guy.
He's great. He has almost no expressions on his face.
Well, the Mr. Potter origin story would be a lot of fun.
Wow. You know, I'm surprised we haven't gotten that.
I've thought at multiple points during the course of this conversation about Googling to see if somebody, isn't that the fan fiction that you want to write? Like if you're going to write fan fiction about It's a Wonderful Life or the world around it, don't you want to see the rise of Potter?
The rise of Potter.
Let's call it Mr. Potter.
Yep. The crimes of Mr. Potter.
Fantastic. Never mind.
Fantastic lives and where to find them.
Bedford Falls. So I'm not.
Rise of Bedford Falls. The Rise of Potter. Right.
I did just find in Googling that I didn't find anything interesting, but I did just find that at the time, some in the FBI considered the film's portrayal of Potter as unfair. And a 1947 FBI internal memo states that the film, quote, represented a rather obvious attempt to discredit bankers by casting Lionel Barrymore as a Scrooge type so that he would be the most hated man in the picture. This is a common trick used by communists.
Whoa.
So our government had Capra on their radar, and they were not going to let his communist propaganda get by without a memo. It's your tax dollars at work, folks.
Good.
Yay.
All right, well, Merry Christmas, Ben.
Merry Christmas, Nathan.
And you'll spend... What does Mr. Potter say?
Merry Christmas to you. No. Happy New Year to you. In jail.
That's not much of a dunk. I like to think that if we lingered there, Mr. Potter would have been like, "No, wait!" And like he came up with something better than
Yeah.
Say that again. Well, a Happy New Year to you, Jake.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
You wonderful old building and loan. Yeah, we'll be back next year with more Sanity at the Movies. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, and until next time.
Attaboy, Clarence.